What happens when family expectations turn toxic and you finally choose yourself? Astria's life had always felt like it was lived in the shadows, ignored, misunderstood, and alone. Her unique ability to sense others' emotions made her an outcast, even in her own home. As her sister Tiffany basked in praise and affection, Astria quietly withdrew, learning to hide her true self. But when she sensed danger to those she loved, she couldn't stay silent any longer. Stay tuned to see how Astria breaks free from years of neglect and begins to carve out her own path. Don't forget to subscribe for more transformative stories. Families face conflicts and financial struggles, but there are also families that manage to stick together, weathering life's challenges. It's clear which kind leads to more happiness, don't you think? My name is Astria, and I've been called an oddball since childhood. I'm not sure what's different about me. I just know that people always say I'm different. Being labeled as different wasn't the issue. The real problem was being overlooked, ignored by my own parents. And that led to a lonely childhood. I've always been unusually sensitive to other people's emotions. I can somehow sense what they're thinking. I don't know how I do it. It's not like I can see or feel anything specific, but it's as natural to me as moving my hand or breathing. It seemed strange to me, and I couldn't understand why others couldn't do the same. There was a time when I picked up a bad vibe from a colleague my father brought home from work. I warned my mother to be cautious, but she didn't listen. Later, that same colleague tricked my father into signing a contract as a guarantor for a loan. Although my mother brushed off my warning, when my father stepped away from the table with the colleague, I said, "Dad, something about the word joint feels dangerous. I don't know what it means, but please, just be careful." My father hesitated and refused to sign as a joint guarantor. Thanks to that, when the colleague went bankrupt and couldn't repay the debt, my father was spared from taking on the entire burden. Another time, while shopping with my mother, I felt an unease wash over me, like a wave pushing against my chest. I turned around and saw a man in sunglasses and a hat with an aura of bad intent. I pulled my mother's hand and whispered, "Let's take the side street." Confused, my mother asked what was wrong. But just as we moved away, we heard someone shout, "Thief!" from the street we had been on. The man had snatched a woman's purse and fled, causing her to fall and hurt herself badly. If we hadn't moved, he would have targeted my mother. These types of moments kept happening, and people started to see me as strange, mysterious. My parents, unsure of how to deal with me, began to distance themselves. The more I experienced, the more I felt isolated. What was normal to me was completely abnormal to others. So, I began keeping my thoughts to myself. I stopped expressing my feelings because I knew no one else felt what I felt. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't be seen as weird. I would just be like any other kid. I have a sister, Tiffany, who's 4 years younger than me. Unlike me, Tiffany was a regular kid one everyone adored. Over time, I withdrew more into myself, while Tiffany became even cuter, more charming. It was clear who everyone preferred. Our parents started favoring Tiffany, showering her with affection while quietly dismissing me. They would say, "Tiffany is such a lovely girl, but Astria seems to be a bit darker." Yet, they noticed I had become less odd, but still thought I was different. What they called odd was my refusal to talk about things that only I could sense. It was how I dealt with the world, but they didn't understand. I grew up with little love or attention from my parents, while Tiffany received all the affection meant for both of us. Tiffany, spoiled and pampered, began to notice the coldness our parents showed me and started to look down on me. "I don't like being around you," she'd say. "Your gloominess rubs off on me. I'm so cute, but your lunar image brings me down." Tiffany would insult me at every chance she got, and our parents would scold her lightly but never made an effort to correct her. When I was in 8th grade and Tiffany was in 5th grade, she was scouted by a talent agency on the street. "I knew it! It's because I'm cute," she said. "They said I could even appear on TV," Tiffany said, pleased with herself. She started dreaming big, and our parents didn't seem entirely against it. "You should calm down and think carefully. I sense something shady about this," I spoke up, expressing the intuition that I had long suppressed because I didn't want Tiffany to get into trouble. Tiffany, who didn't know about my unique abilities, said, "What's your problem? Are you just jealous because you're not cute and nobody approached you? Don't say weird things and stop interfering with me." She seemed furious. Even my parents, who knew about my ability, either forgot about it or were too excited about Tiffany standing on the glamorous stage. They sided with Tiffany and criticized me. After that, I resolved to remain silent again. I told myself that there was nothing good in saying unnecessary things. One day, a student teacher came to my junior high school. He was a male college student who graduated from the school and wanted to be a physical education teacher. As he shared his dreams about education and gave a strong greeting, the teacher and students, especially the female students, were charmed. When he responded cheerfully to the girls' excited cheers, I sensed a dark aura from him. I had always vowed to hide my unique abilities, but seeing my classmates potentially in danger, I decided to break my self-imposed rule. I chose a teacher who seemed understanding and talked to her. "I know that this is sudden, but please believe me and help me," I said. The teacher was puzzled by my sudden request, but agreed to stake out a certain location after school, just as I asked. I didn't tell the teacher the details. I had no reason to think she would believe me, but the fact that she agreed to help without any explanation made me think she wasn't an ordinary person either. The next day, the school was in an uproar. The male student teacher was arrested for violating a public nuisance prevention ordinance. The location where the teacher staked out was near the girls' restroom. Within 10 minutes of starting the stakeout, the student teacher appeared, entered the girls' restroom, and installed a video camera. The teacher caught him in the act. Thanks to that, the female students were saved from being secretly filmed and their dignity was protected. Meanwhile, my sister, who had joined the talent agency, was proudly telling everyone about it, but there were no real lessons or auditions. She only had to pay expensive membership and lesson fees. Then, suddenly, the agency closed down, leaving an empty shell. In short, my sister was scammed. She cried and screamed, directing her anger at me. "It's all because you said weird things. My future is ruined and it's all your fault." It didn't make any sense, but my sister seemed to truly believe it. Maybe that was the only way she could cope. For me, it felt like a disaster and a constant nuisance. Our parents didn't say anything unreasonable outright, but their behavior had shifted. They grew more distant from me and more supportive of her. I ended up feeling like the outsider again, the one who didn't quite belong. I was happy that I could help everyone at school, but I was terrified that my actions would backfire, cornering me in a way I couldn't escape. It was then that I received a call from the teacher who had listened to my story, asking me to come to the staff room. Worried I'd be labeled as the strange one once again, I hesitated before opening the door to the staff room. "You knew something like that was going to happen, didn't you?" the teacher asked quietly, no introduction, no pleasantries. Realizing there was no point in pretending, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and told the teacher about my mysterious ability. "I thought so. I know there are very few people like you," the teacher responded, a hint of understanding in their voice. For the first time, someone actually understood my situation. The teacher revealed that they knew someone with a power like mine, someone who had gone through similar struggles. "Actually, that person is my aunt, and I've been listening to her stories for a long time. You must be carrying a lot of worries because of your ability. Maybe speaking with someone who's walked that path will help clear your mind." The teacher then introduced me to the person. She looked at me with kind, wise eyes. "It's natural to worry, but you don't have to suffer alone." There was something about her gaze, something deep and reassuring, like she could see right through everything I was hiding. Her name was Isolde, and she had the same power as me. She'd been hiding her own abilities since childhood, and the struggles she'd faced mirrored mine. The stories she shared, from someone who had lived through the same experiences, helped release the knot of anxiety and doubt I'd been holding on to for so long. From that day, my interactions with Isolde began. I started calling her my mentor, but she just smiled wryly and said, "Please don't." Thanks to Isolde, or rather, my mentor, I began to change. I had always tried to live quietly, unnoticed by everyone, but as I became more aware of my own power and its implications, I slowly started to embrace life as an ordinary girl again. It was a hard process, but with each passing day, I felt more like myself. However, since the incident with the talent agency, I still haven't been able to reconcile with my sister. If anything, it feels like we're drifting further apart. Now, it's normal for her to ignore me, and when she does speak, it's usually to complain or insult me without reason. I often don't even understand what triggers her mood swings. My power couldn't predict her emotional changes either. Just because you got into college doesn't mean you're anything special, she'd sneer. It's not even that great of a school, and you're just so carefree. My sister, who had hoped to get into her dream high school but ended up at her second choice, became resentful when I was accepted into my first choice college. It wasn't like I'd rubbed it in her face. She dissed me because of her own frustrations. Our parents, rather than addressing the tension, focused solely on soothing her anger and kept their distance from me as if it was my fault and I should just stay out of the way. It seemed that my sister didn't like the fact that I had become brighter since meeting my mentor. To my sister, I had to be a dark and gloomy girl who was inferior to her. But my sister is really smart. It was surprising that she failed her high school entrance exams. Of course, she was filled with frustration and poured all of that into studying at her new high school. As a result, she was at the top of her class for all 4 years and got accepted into a prestigious national university on her first try. I got into the most difficult university. Your college doesn't even come close to mine, she boasted. I lightly responded with, "That's true," to my satisfied sister because I knew nothing good would come from getting too involved with her. However, my sister thought that my light reaction was belittling her accomplishments and unleashed a barrage of verbal abuse at me. Both my parents were at their wits' end with my sister, who couldn't be calmed down once she lost her temper. All they could do was watch nervously. They blamed me for causing the trouble and eventually ended up calling me a troublemaker. I wanted to argue back about who the real problem child was, but I always swallowed my words to avoid complicating things further. Setting aside my sister's issues, as I approached college graduation, I had to seriously confront my own career path. I was no longer as introverted as I used to be. I still struggled with socializing and had little confidence in building good relationships with others. My ability allowed me to detect people's negative emotions. While I could sense positive emotions too, it seemed people were more prone to negative ones, which made detecting such negativity painful for me. Throughout my school life, I was tormented by these swirling negative emotions and had come close to losing faith in people. Could someone like me really manage to work at a company? I decided to consult my mentor about this dilemma. I wanted to learn how she had overcome similar issues, as I was sure she had faced them as well. I have experienced the same worries as you. Maybe you should consider doing the kind of work I do, she suggested. My mentor used to work as a fortune teller and a counselor, helping people resolve their problems. She could use her abilities to their fullest extent and contribute to the world and people around her. Also, she was able to work freelance, which meant she didn't have to belong to any organization. This way, there were fewer chances of getting entangled in human relationships or being affected by other people's emotions. "It's the perfect job for people like us," she said. Encouraged by my mentor, I decided to pursue the same line of work. She taught me everything from how to do the job to how to acquire clients. Nowadays, thanks to the internet, it's possible to work from home without any issues. When I told my parents and sister that I would not seek employment after graduation and work from home instead, they responded, "What's that? What kind of job is that? Seems so dumb. You'll be home all the time. At least make sure to do the housework. Can you even make a living doing that? How will you cover living expenses?" Well, as long as you contribute to the household, do whatever you want. While I expected such a response from my parents, it made me feel a little lonely that they didn't support me more. I felt sad thinking about their demands for housework and money. My mood darkened, and so my life working from home began. At first, I had no job requests and struggled day by day, feeling helpless. But with my mentor's guidance, I slowly found my footing and began earning a living. For nearly a year, I couldn't contribute financially to the household, so I took on the housework instead. My dad didn't seem impressed, but my mom, ever the peacemaker, kept him in check. After about a year, when I finally started contributing financially, my dad mocked me. "Oh, finally earning some pocket change, huh?" he said, but I could see the subtle satisfaction in his eyes as the money started rolling in. Still, even though I was contributing, the pile of housework didn't decrease. Our lives remained unchanged. Then, 3 years later, my sister graduated from college and landed a job at a foreign company. Unlike you, I'm an elite. You're just unemployed, living at the bottom of the barrel. It's so depressing having you as a sister, she'd say. My sister, who'd managed to land a job, started belittling me for working from home. What are you doing working from home? That's like playing. You're nothing more than a parasite living at home. She'd throw in jabs like, it's really weird not working outside. I'm working hard, earning everyone's respect. Now I'm promoted to team leader. My pay's probably 5 times yours. There's no way a homebody like you could ever earn that much. Tiffany, who had barely spent a year and a half at the company before being promoted to team leader, kept looking down on me. She flaunted her good salary, yet hardly contributed any money to the household. The chores were all dumped onto Mom and me: laundry, cleaning, preparing meals, everything. When I'd try to speak up, Tiffany, you should take care of yourself a little. You can't just spend all your money on fun. You need to contribute to the house, too. She'd dismiss me with a wave. You, the unemployed one, can handle the chores. I'm saving my money for my future. Our parents, as usual, allowed her to do as she pleased. For some inexplicable reason, they'd say, it's Tiffany. It can't be helped. I had become accustomed to my current lifestyle, and it was comfortable. It allowed me to work in peace, but I was starting to wonder how I could take care of myself, how I could stop being the one who always had to pick up the slack. Then, one day, my sister dropped a bombshell. Without any warning, both our parents and I were caught off guard. He's a real elite with an annual income, she said, sneering at me. Marriage is just a pipe dream for someone unemployed like you, isn't it? She continued, casually announcing that she would bring her boyfriend over the following Sunday. Sunday arrived, and we were still reeling from the sudden developments. The man my sister introduced was impeccably dressed, sharp in a suit. He looked like a young, successful professional. Nice to meet you. My name is Braxton, he said, his voice smooth and confident. I would like to ask for your permission to marry Tiffany. He greeted us with polite manners, his presence commanding respect. Isn't he wonderful, just like I said? Tiffany gushed. I'm going to be so happy with this man. Dad, clearly impressed by Braxton's presence, asked, So, Braxton, what do you do for a living? Yes, I'm currently training at a company my father knows, Braxton replied, a slight smile on his face. We were puzzled by the term training. But Tiffany, unable to contain her excitement, chimed in with a gleam in her eye. His father is the president. He's training now to take over the presidency in the future. My sister was practically glowing with pride, picturing herself as the future president's wife. After that, we exchanged pleasantries, and Braxton left with an air of effortless charm. There were a few things that made me raise an eyebrow during the conversation, but my parents were thrilled with the high-status man. However, I felt an inexplicable dark shadow from that seemingly refreshing and good-natured man, Braxton. It was something only I could sense, so I didn't know how to explain it. I could no longer remain silent, fearing that marrying a man with hidden issues would make my sister unhappy. Tiffany, you've only been dating him for less than 4 months. You might want to understand him a little more before deciding to get married, I cautioned, driven by a strong gut feeling. Sis, he's an elite and a future CEO. You won't find anyone better than him. Oh, I see. You're jealous, aren't you? You're bitter because you're comparing your life to my happy one. Poor jobless sis, she retorted. Even our parents got angry at me for interfering with Tiffany's happiness. You're just unemployed, so at the very least, stop interfering with your sister's happiness, they said. It was clear that our parents were hoping to secure a comfortable old age by marrying Tiffany off to a wealthy man. Frustrated by my inability to effectively communicate my concern about the dark shadow I sensed looming over Tiffany, my head was spinning. In the meantime, the two got engaged, and a meeting between both families took place. Braxton's parents, like him, carried an air of freshness about them, but I felt the same ominous cloud hidden behind them. However, I was unable to convey this danger to my overjoyed sister and parents. Before I knew it, the day of the wedding had arrived. The CEO of our company is attending today's reception. Can you comprehend how much I'm appreciated and anticipated in my company? "I guess it's a kind of honor that a shut-in like you wouldn't understand," my sister said gleefully before leaving the house. She always included some derogatory words directed at me. At the wedding ceremony held at a hotel, the couple, who pledged eternal love to each other, entered the reception hall. Watching my sister, who was beaming with joy, I worried about how long this happiness would last. As my sister mentioned, the CEO made a keynote speech full of praise for her, which delighted her. Once the speeches were over, food and drinks were served to each table. There were all sorts of delicious-looking dishes, but I started to feel a sense of discomfort gradually. I realized that no dishes were being served in front of me. At first, I thought my meal was just late, but other tables were already being served drinks, appetizers, and so on, one after another. Clearly something was off. Nothing was being delivered to me. People at the same table began to notice this oddity and started whispering among themselves. At that moment, my sister came over to me and whispered into my ear with laughter in her voice. "We didn't prepare free meals for the unemployed after all. It's such a waste to serve such food to a jobless person. You should just eat potato chips at home. Just leave your gift money and go home." This outrageous remark was spoken loudly in my ear, and my ears rang. Braxton, sitting at the groom's table, was grinning and nodding. Even our parents, who at first seemed surprised, said, "Well, it's true. Astria is jobless after all." I was first taken aback, then a wave of anger surged up within me. "I never thought you'd stoop this low, sis. Mom and Dad, this is unacceptable. How could you accept such rudeness?" My parents just scowled at me, never bothering to reprimand my sister. "Fine, I get it. I'm leaving, but don't come crying to me later," I said. "You sound like a sore loser," she shot back. Amidst the chaos of this unbelievable event, a man suddenly stood up. "Sorry to interrupt. I'm the groom's brother, Jasper. My brother and parents are trash, but it seems the bride is even worse." "I can't take it anymore," said the man who introduced himself as Jasper. He continued, "Dad, your company went bankrupt 5 months ago, didn't it? Pretending to still be a CEO is just a scheme to mooch off the bride and her family. Braxton will never become a CEO. He's planning to leech off his wife while pretending otherwise. He's unemployed now." Jasper's words caused a commotion among the guests, but my sister was the most heated. "What do you mean you lied to me? What do you mean, unemployed?" she demanded, her face turning from red to blue, her eyes welling up with tears. Our parents, their assumptions proven wrong, began to yell and curse. The anguished cries of my family echoed throughout the venue. The groom and his parents remained silent, looking sulky. Before the ceremony, I had received a confession and apology from Jasper and asked him to speak his mind without reservation if something happened during the reception. As my sister was berating Braxton with a wrathful face, another man couldn't take it anymore and stood up. It was the president of my sister's company. "Enough already! This is embarrassing! You have no right to criticize the groom! What do you think about your terrible attitude towards your own sister?" The president's angry voice made my sister's face contort in fear. "For one, I didn't attend your wedding for your sake. I wouldn't have come if you weren't the sister of Astria." Suddenly, my name was mentioned by the president, and my sister's eyes widened in surprise. "Huh? Who are you talking about?" "Astria is a goddess to many of us business owners, rescuing countless companies from the brink of collapse," he continued. "In fact, with the guidance of my mentor, I have been working as an advisor for corporate revitalization and growth, starting with fortune-telling and life consultation. I used my abilities to show companies the path they should take. All my advice was spot on, and the companies that sought my help experienced a rapid resurgence in business, achieving a V-shaped recovery. As a result, I had earned titles like teacher and goddess. My sister's company had also consulted with me 5 months ago, and thanks to my advice, it had been reborn as a stronger enterprise. The president, grateful for my assistance, attended the wedding today as well. "I had no idea you're not just a basement-dwelling, unemployed nobody, are you?" my sister said, finally realizing the truth. Thanks to my thriving career, her assumptions had been shattered. "I now earn several times what you do. Despite contributing significantly to the household income, our parents never seemed to care about me. They thought that money was from Tiffany." "Oh, we thought Tiffany provided that money," they said, misunderstanding the situation. There was no way Tiffany would have been contributing money to the house. The wedding reception erupted into chaos, quickly called off. Naturally, all the guests received full refunds for their wedding gifts. "I've already signed a contract for an apartment in my name. I can't afford it on my own, especially now that he's unemployed," my sister sobbed, her voice desperate. "You're the one who signed the contract. I don't know anything about that," Braxton shot back, his frustration palpable. The wedding was a complete disaster, and it all stemmed from my sister's malice. She might argue there were reasons for her behavior, but none of them held any weight. After the fiasco, Tiffany divorced Braxton and demanded alimony. But with Braxton unemployed and his parents having little to offer, her claim didn't amount to much. She could barely manage to pay for the wedding venue, let alone the apartment she had contracted. The place meant to be their love nest stood empty and canceled, but the debts didn't vanish. Tiffany found herself drowning in loans. Her outrageous behavior at the wedding spread like wildfire, reaching her colleagues and quickly tarnishing her reputation. The CEO had no choice but to demote her. Without a place in the company, Tiffany's pride as an elite employee crumbled. She wanted to run away, quit it all, but the weight of her financial burden kept her in place. She ended up in a small, barely visible basement storage room, working a menial job to keep her head above water. Braxton and his parents, who had once tried to leech off Tiffany, now scraped by with day labor. Jasper, Braxton's older brother, had cut all ties with his family, disgusted by their behavior. When Tiffany hit rock bottom, our parents, who had always taken her side, quickly abandoned her and tried to cozy up to me instead. To them, I said, "I've had enough of being manipulated by you. I'm cutting ties. Goodbye forever." I packed my things, left the house, and started fresh in a newly rented apartment. They took Tiffany in, but she couldn't contribute to their household expenses. Her salary was slashed, and without my financial help, they quickly became exhausted. They struggled daily, trying to maintain their old lifestyle, but without the necessary income, their previous comforts turned into a constant battle. Meanwhile, my career was flourishing. I guided companies and individuals in the right direction, using my skills to help them succeed. My reputation grew, and more clients sought my advice. This success brought not only financial stability, but also a sense of fulfillment. For the first time, I felt appreciated for my abilities and the positive impact I was making in the world. After the wedding disaster, I began to grow closer to Jasper. He had shown such honesty and bravery during that chaotic time. We formed a bond, and recently, he proposed. I accepted. If everything goes as planned, marriage could be in our future. Jasper is a man with a pure heart, no dark secrets lurking beneath the surface. Unlike the people my sister had surrounded herself with, Jasper is genuine and kind. I'm excited about the future with him. Together, we dream of a life full of love, mutual respect, and understanding. With him by my side, I feel hope and anticipation for what lies ahead. We've already discussed our future plans and how we want to support each other through everything. Looking back, I feel a mixture of relief and pride. I'm relieved to have cut ties with my parents and sister, who never truly appreciated me. I'm proud of the person I've become, despite the challenges. And I'm incredibly grateful for Jasper, who has brought light and love into my life. As I look toward the future, I feel an overwhelming sense of excitement. I can't wait to see where life takes us, knowing that with Jasper, I'll never have to hide who I am or feel unappreciated. Our love and partnership are built on honesty, trust, and mutual support. Together, we'll face whatever comes our way, side by side. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most ignore you, criticize you, and only come to you when they need something? When the world sees you as different, when your family makes you feel like you don't belong, do you continue to fight for their approval, or do you walk away and choose a new path? Astria's life has been one of isolation and misunderstanding. Despite her extraordinary abilities, her family never truly saw her. Only her sister Tiffany, the perfect child, received their love and attention. Astria spent years holding back, doubting herself, until one fateful moment when she stood up, not just for herself, but for others. She helped save her school from a predator, and in doing so, found the courage to speak out. But even when she tried to warn her sister about the man she was about to marry, her concerns were dismissed. The result was a wedding disaster, exposing the lies and false pretenses Tiffany had surrounded herself with. As Astria's career took off, she realized her family's manipulation had gone too far. She cut ties with them forever. Astria learned that family isn't about who shares your blood, but who truly sees and values you for who you are. She's now living her best life, building her career, and even finding love with someone who respects her. With Jasper by her side, she's ready for a future filled with mutual respect and love, something she never received from her family. So, what do you think? If you were in Astria's shoes, would you have walked away sooner, or would you have tried to fix things with your family? Let's discuss in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories.
"You are cruel and selfish for stopping my son from having everything he wants," my mother-in-law hissed, her gaze piercing into me. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and the sizzle of the grill, a storm brewed within me. My response when it came was a clap of thunder, revealing a secret that would change everything. I always believed that love could conquer all. That's what fairy tales taught us, right? But standing in our cozy living room, adorned with photos of David and me in happier times, I realized some battles were more formidable than others. As I gently dusted the picture from our wedding day, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the family we had dreamed of but couldn't create. David was in the kitchen, humming a tune that used to make me laugh. Now it was a bittersweet melody. He knew, just as I did, the pain of our unfulfilled dream. We had been trying to conceive for 3 years. The doctors had been clear about my condition. With only one functioning ovary and polycystic ovary syndrome, PCOS, the odds were stacked against us. I remembered the night I told David about my fertility issues. We were just a few months into our relationship, but I knew he was the one. The look in his eyes was not pity, but determination. He held my hands, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together, Anna. There's more than one way to build a family." His optimism was a balm to my worried heart. Yet as years passed, with every negative pregnancy test, a part of that hope faded. Tonight, we were hosting a family dinner. David's family, particularly his mother, Mrs. Harper, was unaware of our struggles. Each time she asked about grandchildren, a small part of me crumbled. I couldn't bear to tell her the truth, that her son might never be a father because of me. As guests started arriving, I pasted on a smile and greeted everyone warmly. David's mother walked in with her usual flair, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for something or someone missing. "Anna, dear, this is lovely, but you know what would make it lovelier? The laughter of a little one running around," she said, her voice loud enough for others to hear. I felt David's hand tighten around mine, a silent message of support. I managed a weak smile. "Maybe one day, Mrs. Harper." The evening progressed with laughter and chatter, but the unspoken words between David, his mother, and me hung heavily in the air, a reminder of the dream that remained just out of reach. The sun cast a warm glow over our backyard as I tended to my garden, a hobby that had become my sanctuary from the world. The flowers didn't ask questions or pass judgment. They simply flourished under my care. I often wished life could be as straightforward as gardening. The sound of David's car pulling into the driveway snapped me back to reality. It was Saturday, which meant another family gathering, another chance for Mrs. Harper to ask the question that twisted my heart every time. "When will you give me grandchildren?" I loved David's family. They were boisterous, lively, and close-knit. But Mrs. Harper's relentless probing about our plans for children was a constant source of tension. David had suggested telling them about my condition, but the thought of exposing such a personal part of our lives made me uneasy. I wasn't ready for the pity or the well-meaning but often ignorant advice. At the gathering, the atmosphere was lively as usual. David's cousins were there with their kids, running around, their laughter echoing through the house. I watched David with them, his face lighting up in a way that both warmed and broke my heart. He would have made an amazing father. Mrs. Harper approached me as I was helping myself to some iced tea. "Anna, I don't mean to pry, but you're not getting any younger. David needs a child. He's so good with them, she said, her tone a mix of concern and accusation. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. We're just not ready yet, Mrs. Harper, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She looked unconvinced, her lips pursing in a disapproving line. Well, I just hope you won't wait too long. David deserves to experience fatherhood. Her words stung like a slap. I wanted to scream, to tell her that it wasn't by choice, that every month brought a new wave of disappointment and grief. But I held back, nodding politely before excusing myself. Later that evening, David found me sitting alone on the porch. She doesn't mean to hurt you, he said gently, wrapping an arm around me. I know, I whispered, leaning into his embrace, but her words cut deeper than she realizes. As we sat there, watching the sunset, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer we could keep our struggle a secret, and what would happen when the truth finally came out. The family barbecue at David's parents' house was in full swing when we arrived. The scent of grilling burgers mingled with the laughter of children playing in the yard. I tried to appear cheerful, but inside, I was dreading the inevitable comments from Mrs. Harper. David squeezed my hand as we walked through the garden, his silent way of saying, I'm here with you. He always knew how to calm my nerves. As the afternoon progressed, I found a quiet corner to sit and observe the festivities. David was playing with his cousin's baby, a sight so tender it brought tears to my eyes. He was a natural, cradling the baby with such ease and love. Then I heard her voice dripping with insinuation. You are cruel and selfish for stopping my son from having everything he wants, Mrs. Harper whispered harshly, standing beside me. Her words hit me like a physical blow. The pain, frustration, and anger I had bottled up for so long boiled to the surface. I turned to face her, my voice cold but steady. Well, we seem to have different opinions on that. I think it's cruel and selfish to cheat on your husband and the father of your 2 children with his best friend, kick him out, and move your bid on the side in 2 weeks later. But that's just me. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Mrs. Harper's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. Around us, the chatter ceased as our confrontation drew attention. I hadn't planned to reveal her past indiscretions, but the words had tumbled out in a moment of raw emotion. The family's reaction was immediate. Some looked away uncomfortably, while others whispered among themselves. Mrs. Harper burst into tears, turning to flee the scene. The family quickly rallied around her, their disapproving glances directed at me. I felt like an outsider, a villain in their eyes. David rushed over, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. Anna, what happened? He asked, his eyes searching mine for an explanation. I shook my head, unable to find the words to justify my outburst. I couldn't take it anymore, I murmured. As we drove home, the car filled with a tense silence. David finally spoke, his voice tight with emotion. I'm furious with my mom for what she said, but you crossed a line, Anna. I understood his disappointment, but couldn't bring myself to apologize. The hurt from his mother's words was still too raw, too deep. I know, and I'm sorry it came to this. But I can't apologize to her. Not yet, I said quietly, staring out the window at the passing scenery, feeling more alone than ever. The days following the barbecue were filled with an uneasy silence in our home. David was torn, upset with his mother for her hurtful words, but also disappointed in my reaction. I, on the other hand, was wrestling with a tumult of emotions. Guilt for my outburst, yet a sense of justification for standing up for myself. I spent long hours in our garden, tending to the flowers, but my mind was elsewhere. The words I had hurled at Mrs. Harper replayed in my mind, each time slicing through me with a fresh wave of remorse. I hadn't meant to air her dirty laundry, but her constant jabs about my infertility had pushed me to my breaking point. One evening, David joined me in the garden. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with hues of orange and pink. We sat on the bench, the silence between us heavy. Anna, we need to talk, David began, his voice hesitant. I know my mom was out of line, but what you said... I cut him off, my voice trembling. I know, David. I'm sorry. It's just her words hurt me so deeply. It's like she thinks the only value I have is in bearing children. David took my hand, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, and I'm sorry for that. But we can't let this tear us apart. We're stronger together. The conversation that followed was raw and emotional. We spoke of our pain, our fears, and our hopes for the future. David reassured me of his unwavering love and support, irrespective of whether we had children. It was a balm to my aching heart. The next few weeks were a period of reflection and healing. I started seeing a therapist to help me navigate my feelings of inadequacy and anger. It was during these sessions that I realized the depth of my internal struggle with infertility and its impact on my identity and self-worth. David and I also began attending couples therapy. It was a space where we could openly discuss our feelings and work on strengthening our bond. We learned to communicate better and support each other more effectively. Despite the progress we were making, the rift with his family remained. David continued to visit his parents, but I couldn't bring myself to face them, not yet. I needed time to heal and to find the strength to face Mrs. Harper again. As days turned into weeks, I started to understand that while I couldn't control what others said or thought about me, I could control how I reacted and how much power I gave their words over my life. It was a slow and difficult journey, but one that I was determined to walk, for the sake of my peace and for the love I had for David. The world continued its usual pace outside, but within the walls of our home, time seemed to move differently. The rift with David's family cast a shadow over our daily lives, a reminder of the unresolved tensions and the hurt that still lingered. David went to visit his family regularly, but I stayed behind, the thought of facing them, especially Mrs. Harper, still too daunting. In these moments of solitude, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired. One afternoon, while lost in these thoughts, my phone buzzed with a message from my sister, Laura. She had always been my confidant, the one person who understood me without judgment. "Coffee? My treat. You need a break," her message read. Gratefully, I accepted her invitation. Meeting Laura at our favorite cafe felt like a breath of fresh air. As we sipped our lattes, I poured out everything that had happened, the words tumbling out in a rush. Laura listened intently, her eyes filled with empathy. "Anna, you're stronger than you realize. And sometimes standing up for yourself means people get hurt. It's not ideal, but it's also not your burden to bear their reactions to your truth." Her words were a comfort, offering a perspective I hadn't considered. It wasn't just about forgiveness or who was right or wrong. It was about understanding my worth and not allowing others to diminish it. "Maybe it's time to start thinking about what you want, not just what is expected of you," Laura suggested gently. Her advice lingered in my mind in the days that followed. I realized that I had been so caught up in trying to meet others' expectations that I had lost sight of my own needs and happiness. With Laura's encouragement, I began exploring activities that brought me joy. I joined a local book club and started attending yoga classes. These small steps helped me regain a sense of control and normalcy in my life. However, the issue with David's family was like an unfinished chapter looming in the background. I knew I couldn't avoid them forever. One evening, I broached the subject with David. "I think it's time I try to mend things with your mother," I said, the words feeling heavy but necessary. David's face lit up with relief and hope. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure," I replied. "It's not just for you or your family, it's for me too. I need to find closure, one way or another." We planned a small dinner at our house, just David's parents and us. The thought of facing Mrs. Harper again was daunting, but I knew it was a necessary step towards healing and moving forward. As the day approached, I felt a mixture of anxiety and resolve. It was time to close this painful chapter and hopefully start a new one. The day of the dinner arrived, and our home was filled with the delicious aromas of the dishes David and I had prepared together. It was a simple menu, but each dish was made with care, a silent testament to our hope for reconciliation. As the doorbell rang, my heart raced. David gave me an encouraging smile before opening the door. His parents stood there, his father with a tentative smile, and Mrs. Harper, her expression unreadable. The initial greetings were polite, if somewhat strained. We sat down to dinner, the conversation skirting around safe topics like the weather and David's job. But the elephant in the room was palpable. As we were finishing dessert, I took a deep breath and turned to Mrs. Harper. "I wanted to say something," I began, my voice steady despite the nervousness I felt. "What happened at the barbecue? I'm sorry for what I said." It was out of line, and I let my emotions get the best of me. Mrs. Harper looked at me, her eyes showing a mixture of surprise and something softer, perhaps a hint of understanding. I was hurt by what you said, but I also realize I pushed you too far with my comments. I'm sorry for that, she replied, her voice quavering slightly. David and his father watched the exchange, a sense of relief visible in their eyes. It wasn't a perfect apology from either side, but it was a start, a crack in the wall of tension that had built up between us. The conversation that followed was tentative but genuine. Mrs. Harper asked about my interests, and for the first time seemed genuinely interested in my life beyond the prospect of grandchildren. I talked about the book club I had joined and my newfound love for yoga. She listened, nodding, and even shared some of her own hobbies. It was a small bridge, but it was something. As the evening came to an end and David's parents prepared to leave, Mrs. Harper paused at the door. Anna, would you like to join me for a gardening workshop next weekend? I think you might enjoy it. I was taken aback by the invitation, but pleased. I'd like that, I replied with a genuine smile. After they left, David wrapped his arms around me. I'm proud of you, he said softly. I leaned back against him, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it felt hopeful. We had taken the first steps towards healing and understanding, opening the door to a future where, regardless of what it held, we would face it together. The day the tornado hit, I was at work, my mind buried in mundane tasks, unaware of the chaos brewing at home. It was a typical spring day in our small town, the kind where the weather can't decide between sunshine and storms. When my phone rang, displaying my neighbor's number, I felt a spike of unease. Emily, you need to come home now, her voice trembled. It's your house, the tornado. My heart sank. I rushed through the emptying streets, the sky a menacing shade of gray. Turning onto our street was like entering a nightmare. Trees uprooted, power lines down, our neighborhood looked like a war zone. And there, standing defiant yet wounded, was our home. The sight of it brought a lump to my throat. Windows shattered, the roof partially torn off, our beloved home was a shell of its former self. But it was still standing. That was something. Thankfully, no one was home when the tornado struck. My husband, Mark, and our 2 kids were safe, which was all that truly mattered. But as we stood there, surveying the damage, I felt a sense of loss for the life we had built within those walls. We spent the next few hours salvaging what we could. Our neighbors, true to the spirit of our tight-knit community, rallied around us, offering help and support. In the midst of this chaos, there was a sense of unity, a shared resolve to rebuild not just our home, but our lives. That evening, we found temporary refuge at my sister's house. Exhausted, I finally had a moment to sit down and check my phone. It buzzed relentlessly with messages and missed calls. As I scrolled through, one particular notification caught my eye. It was a Facebook post from my mother-in-law, Linda. The post was dramatic, to say the least, claiming our house was completely destroyed. I felt a surge of irritation. Linda had a penchant for exaggeration, especially on social media, but this was a new low, even for her. Can you believe this? I showed the post to Mark, who let out a weary sigh. She just doesn't get it, he said, his voice a mix of anger and resignation. She knows I hate it when she posts about our personal life. The post had already gathered a string of comments, people expressing shock and sorrow, offering prayers and help. It was a kind gesture from the community, but based on false pretenses. I wanted to correct the post to set the record straight, but Mark placed a hand on my shoulder. Let's just deal with it tomorrow, he said. We've got enough on our plate right now. He was right, of course. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I couldn't shake off a growing sense of anger. Linda's actions, though perhaps well-intentioned, had crossed a line, and I was determined to make her understand that. The morning light did little to ease the heaviness in my heart. As I scrolled through the endless messages on my phone, Linda's post from last night glared back at me, a stark reminder of the unwanted drama unfolding alongside our real crisis. Sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, I pondered my next move. Mark, ever the peacemaker, suggested letting it go, focusing on our immediate needs instead. But the more I thought about it, the more Linda's actions bothered me. It wasn't just about the post. It was about respect, privacy, and understanding boundaries. I decided to call Linda, hoping a direct conversation might resolve the issue. The phone rang, and after a couple of tones, her cheerful voice filled the line. "Emily, darling, how are you holding up? I've been so worried." "Linda, we need to talk about your Facebook post," I said, cutting to the chase. There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, that," she replied, her tone shifting. "I was just trying to let our friends and family know what happened. Gather some support for you all." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "Linda, our house wasn't destroyed. It's badly damaged, yes, but your post is misleading, and Mark specifically dislikes personal matters being shared on social media." There was another pause, longer this time. "Well, I didn't mean any harm," she said defensively. "I just wanted to help." I softened my tone. "I appreciate that, Linda, but this isn't the way. Can you please correct the post? People are worried unnecessarily." There was a reluctant murmur of agreement from her before we ended the call. I felt a small victory, but the irritation lingered. I couldn't shake off the feeling that Linda's actions were more about garnering attention for herself than genuinely helping us. The rest of the day was a blur of phone calls and arrangements, insurance agents, contractors, family members offering help. In the midst of it all, I kept thinking about Linda and the impact of her thoughtlessness. It was a small part of a much larger problem, but it felt symbolic of the lack of understanding and respect that had always tinged our relationship. That evening, as we gathered at my sister's house for a makeshift dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to the Facebook fiasco. My sister, always the outspoken one, didn't mince words. "You should give her a taste of her own medicine," she said, half joking. "See how she likes it when her personal business is all over the internet." Her words, meant in jest, sparked an idea in my mind. A plan began to form, one that would teach Linda a lesson in a way she wouldn't expect. It was risky, potentially petty, but at that moment, it felt like the perfect response to an ongoing problem. The next day dawned with a sense of purpose for me. As I surveyed the damage to our home once more, I couldn't help but think about the unnecessary chaos Linda's post had caused. The more I reflected on it, the more it felt like a symptom of a much larger issue in our relationship with her. She often overstepped boundaries without considering the consequences, and this time I was determined to make her realize the impact of her actions. Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Linda's exaggerated post continued. Mark's aunt, who had taken the post at face value, had shared her own version of the story, further distorting the truth. This led to a cascade of concerned calls and messages, adding to our already overwhelming situation. Mark, seeing the stress it was causing, finally agreed that something needed to be done. "I just don't understand why she always has to make things about her," he said, frustration evident in his voice. As we sat in the living room of my sister's house, surrounded by a few salvaged belongings, the reality of our situation hit me. We were in the middle of a crisis, yet part of our energy was being drained by a needless social media drama. That evening, I started to put my plan into action. It was simple, yet effective. I would give Linda a taste of her own medicine by sharing a post about her on Facebook. But not just any post. It would be a carefully crafted story, exaggerated just enough to make a point, yet harmless enough not to cause real damage. I spent some time composing the post, ensuring it was just right. "Feeling grateful for Linda," I began, "who bravely saved a stray cat during the storm and is now nursing it back to health at home." It was a complete fabrication, of course, but plausible enough to be believed. I hesitated for a moment before hitting post. This was not my usual style, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I thought about the stress her post had caused us, and with a mix of apprehension and determination, I shared the story. Within minutes, the post started to gain traction. Comments poured in, praising Linda's heroism and kindness. I watched as the notifications flooded in, a part of me feeling guilty for stooping to her level, yet another part feeling a sense of vindication. The following day, Linda called, flustered and overwhelmed by the attention the post had garnered. "Emily, I don't know what to do. Everyone is asking about this cat, and I don't even have one." I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's overwhelming when people share things about you on social media, isn't it?" There was a long pause on the other end. I see your point, she finally said, her voice a mixture of embarrassment and realization. It was a small victory, but an important one. Linda had finally experienced firsthand the impact of her actions. It was a lesson in empathy, delivered through the very medium she couldn't resist. The aftermath of my Facebook post was immediate and revealing. The phone call with Linda had ended on an awkward note, but it sparked a necessary conversation. Later that day, she came over to my sister's house, a rare gesture of humility in her eyes. "I didn't realize how my actions affected you and Mark," Linda began, her usual confident demeanor replaced by a hint of vulnerability. "I never intended to cause you more stress." I appreciated her effort to understand, but years of accumulated frustration bubbled to the surface. "Linda, it's not just about the post, it's about respecting our privacy. Mark has told you many times he doesn't like personal things shared on social media." Linda nodded, looking genuinely remorseful. "I guess I got carried away with wanting to be a part of everything. I didn't think about the consequences." The conversation that followed was long overdue. We talked about boundaries, respect, and the importance of communication. For the first time, I felt like Linda was truly listening, not just hearing what she wanted to. Mark joined us, and together, we began to untangle the complicated web of our family dynamics. It was a difficult conversation, filled with moments of tension and relief, but it was necessary, a step towards understanding and healing. As Linda left, she turned to me. "Thank you for the eye-opener, Emily. I promise to be more thoughtful in the future." The confrontation had been cathartic, but it left me with mixed feelings. My plan had worked, but I couldn't shake off the guilt of using deception, even if it was for a good cause. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We began the arduous process of repairing our home, buoyed by the support of our community. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a sense of purpose and determination. In the midst of the chaos, I often found myself reflecting on the confrontation with Linda. It had been a turning point, not just in our relationship with her, but in how I viewed conflicts and resolutions. I realized that sometimes it takes a drastic measure to bring about change, but the real challenge lies in handling the consequences with grace and understanding. As we slowly put our home and lives back together, I felt a newfound sense of resilience. The tornado had taken much from us, but it had also given us something unexpected, a chance to rebuild, not just our house, but our relationships and ourselves. In the days following the confrontation with Linda, there was a palpable shift in our family dynamics. The air was clearer, albeit still tinged with the remnants of past grievances. Linda's visits became more considerate, and our conversations more meaningful. Yet a part of me remained wary, unconvinced that old habits could change so quickly. As we navigated through the complexities of rebuilding our home, I found myself mulling over the effectiveness of my little plot. It was a tactic I was not proud of, but it had sparked a necessary change. This realization led me to reflect on the concept of revenge. Was it always a negative impulse, or could it, in some contexts, be a catalyst for positive change? I discussed these thoughts with Mark one evening as we sat amidst boxes of salvaged belongings at my sister's house. "I keep thinking about what I did with that Facebook post," I admitted. "Part of me feels guilty, but another part feels like it was the only way to get through to your mom." Mark took my hand, his eyes understanding. "I know it wasn't easy for you, but it did make a difference. Sometimes we need to shake things up to make people see things differently." Encouraged by his words, I started to view my actions in a different light. Revenge, in its many forms, is often seen as a petty or destructive force. But in this case, it had served as a mirror, reflecting the consequences of one's actions back at them. This perspective became a source of strength for me. As we worked through the endless tasks of restoration and dealing with insurance claims, I found a newfound assertiveness. I was no longer hesitant to speak my mind, especially when it came to decisions about our home and family. Linda, for her part, seemed to have taken the lesson to heart. Her interactions with us became more thoughtful, and she was noticeably more restrained on social media. It was a small, yet significant change, one that improved the overall atmosphere whenever we gathered as a family. During this period, I also learned the importance of forgiveness. Holding on to anger and resentment was like carrying a heavy burden, that one that I no longer wished to bear. Forgiving Linda did not mean forgetting what had happened, but it allowed me to move forward without the weight of past conflicts. As our home slowly came back to life, so did our spirits. The process of rebuilding was not just about repairing walls and roofs, but about mending relationships and redefining boundaries. The storm had brought destruction, but in its wake it left room for growth and renewal. The reconstruction of our home progressed steadily, a tangible symbol of our family's resilience. With each repaired wall and repainted room, I felt a sense of accomplishment and hope. This period of rebuilding was not just physical, it was emotional and relational as well. My plan, which had initially been born out of frustration and a desire for revenge, had unexpectedly opened a path to healing and understanding. Linda's transformation, though gradual, was evident. She became more mindful of her words and actions, showing a level of consideration that was previously absent. One weekend, as we were unpacking some boxes in the newly restored living room, Linda dropped by, unannounced yet welcome. She came bearing a homemade cake, a small but significant gesture. We sat around the kitchen table, savoring the cake and the comfort of easy conversation. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Linda began, her tone reflective. "I realize now how much I've overstepped in the past. I'm sorry for the stress I caused you both." Her apology was sincere, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was the closure I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you, Linda," I said, meaning every word. "It means a lot to us." As we talked, I saw a new side of Linda. She listened more than she spoke, her responses thoughtful and considerate. It was a stark contrast to the Linda I had known, the one who always seemed to be at the center of every conversation. This change in Linda had a ripple effect on our family dynamics. Mark and I found ourselves looking forward to her visits, appreciating her efforts to be a better mother and mother-in-law. Our conversations delved deeper, moving beyond surface-level pleasantries to genuine discussions about life, dreams, and fears. In these moments, I realized the power of communication and empathy. My initial plan, conceived in a moment of frustration, had unknowingly paved the way for a deeper connection. It was a reminder that sometimes the most challenging situations can lead to the most profound transformations. As our home neared completion, so did our journey of reconciliation and understanding. The experience had taught us the value of patience, forgiveness, and the strength of family bonds. We had weathered the storm, both literal and metaphorical, emerging stronger and more united. With our home fully restored and our family relationships on a new, healthier trajectory, I took a moment to reflect on the journey we had undergone. The once damaged walls of our home now stood strong and vibrant, echoing the transformation within our family. Linda's evolution was the most remarkable. The once overbearing and intrusive mother-in-law had become a thoughtful and considerate part of our lives. Her change was not just in her actions, but in her understanding of us as a family. She respected our boundaries and became an integral, positive force in our lives. This transformation was not lost on our extended family and friends. They noticed the change in dynamics, often commenting on the newfound harmony at family gatherings. It was a testament to the power of communication and the willingness to change. As for me, the entire ordeal had been a profound learning experience. I had confronted a challenging situation with a plan that, in retrospect, was risky and could have backfired. But it had led to a positive outcome, teaching me the importance of standing up for what I believed was right, albeit in a non-conventional way. I shared these reflections with Mark one evening as we sat in our rejuvenated living room. "I never thought that a plan born out of frustration would lead to such a positive change," I mused. Mark smiled, taking my hand. "Sometimes it's the unexpected paths that lead us to the best destinations. I'm just glad we've come out of this stronger as a family." The incident with the tornado and the subsequent fallout with Linda had brought us closer together. It had shown us the strength of our bond, the resilience of our family, and the transformative power of empathy and understanding. Our home, once a symbol of loss and chaos, had become a haven of love and unity. It stood as a reminder that out of destruction can come growth, and out of conflict can come harmony. We had not only rebuilt our home, but had also restructured our family dynamics into something stronger and more meaningful. As I looked around at the walls that had witnessed so much, I felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. We had weathered the storm, and in its wake, we found a deeper appreciation for each other and the home we shared. I sat in our living room, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, had just told me over the phone that I wouldn't be joining the family trip. "You'll be staying home because it's not enjoyable when outsiders are around," she said with a tone that stung. As she mentioned something about bringing back souvenirs, her voice dripped with sarcasm. The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I looked around, feeling out of place in the house that was supposed to be a temporary refuge. When David and I married, I never imagined that living with his parents would be so challenging. But after our apartment got damaged, his mother, Eleanor, insisted we stay with them. At first, it seemed like a good idea, but I quickly learned that her kindness was a mask for her controlling nature. Every day with Eleanor was a test of patience. She had a way of making me feel small, questioning my every move, from how I cooked to how I cleaned. It was exhausting, trying to live up to her standards, knowing I would never meet them. And David, he just stayed quiet, caught between us. I remember how different things were when David and I first met. We worked together and slowly became friends, and then more. He was different then, more assertive, more present. But living with his parents changed him, or maybe it just showed a side of him I hadn't seen before. I always knew that Eleanor preferred her son over anyone else, but I never thought it would affect me this way. I tried to fit in, to be the daughter-in-law she wanted, but nothing seemed to work. The more I tried, the more she pushed me away. Now, sitting here, feeling like an outsider in what was supposed to be my home, I realized that something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, always feeling unwanted and unappreciated. As I put away the suitcase I had started to pack for the trip, a sense of determination filled me. Eleanor may have won this round, but I wasn't going to let her dictate my happiness. I had to find a way to stand up for myself, to show that I wasn't just an extension of her family, but a person with my own worth. As I put away my suitcase, I couldn't help but think back to how different life was when David and I first met. We worked at the same company, in different departments, but our paths crossed often. It started with casual conversations by the coffee machine, which turned into lunches, and eventually, dates. David was charming, kind, and he made me laugh. It was easy to fall in love with him. We got married 3 years ago, and at first, our life together was everything I had hoped for. We had our own apartment, and we were building our life together. But then, an unexpected fire in the neighboring unit turned our lives upside down. Our apartment was damaged, and we were suddenly homeless. That's when Eleanor stepped in. "Why don't you two stay at our place?" she had offered. It seemed like a good solution at the time. David was relieved, and honestly, so was I. But I didn't realize the price I'd have to pay for that help. Living with David's parents was challenging from the start. Eleanor had always been polite, but once we moved in, her true colors showed. She criticized how I did the laundry, how I cooked, even how I decorated our room. It felt like she was constantly watching and judging me. David, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to it all. He was happy to be back in his childhood home, and I think part of him enjoyed being taken care of by his mother again. I tried to talk to him about how I felt, but he just didn't see it. "She's just set in her ways," he'd say, or, "You know how moms are." But Eleanor wasn't just any mom. She was a mom who made it clear I wasn't good enough for her son. Despite the tension, I tried to make the best of the situation. I thought that if I could just prove to Eleanor that I was a good wife, a good person, she would accept me. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Her house, her rules. Looking back, I wonder if I was naive to think I could win her over. Maybe I should have pushed David harder to move out, to find our own place again. But I didn't, and here I was, stuck in a house where I wasn't wanted, preparing to be left behind while they all went on a family trip without me. As I closed the closet door on the suitcase, I realized that this was more than just about a missed trip. It was about finding my place in this family, or maybe realizing that I never would. I needed to figure out what my next move was, for my own sake. Sitting alone in the house, I began to reflect on the escalating tensions with Eleanor. It wasn't just the snide comments or the constant criticism. It was the way she made me feel like I didn't belong in my own home. My efforts to be a good wife and daughter-in-law seemed to vanish into thin air, never enough to please her. I thought back to the countless evenings spent in silence after another of Eleanor's remarks. Sometimes it was about how I arranged the living room or the way I spoke. Other times it was more personal, like questioning my career choices or why David and I hadn't started a family yet. Each comment was a subtle jab, reminding me that I wasn't living up to her standards. David's reaction, or lack thereof, hurt the most. He always seemed to find a middle ground, trying not to upset either of us. But in doing so, he often sided with his mother. I understood his difficult position, but I couldn't help feeling abandoned. "She's just worried about us," he would say, trying to justify her behavior. But it felt like a betrayal every time he failed to stand up for me. I kept myself busy with work and household chores, partly to avoid confrontation and partly to prove my worth. I worked part-time at a local supermarket, a job that Eleanor deemed unambitious. But I liked it. It gave me a sense of independence and a break from the tense atmosphere at home. Yet, no matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to keep the peace, it was never enough for Eleanor. Her house was her kingdom, and I was merely an unwelcome guest. It was a constant struggle, trying to maintain my identity while being overshadowed by her presence. I remember one particularly harsh weekend. I had just finished cleaning the entire house, a task that Eleanor usually criticized. Expecting another round of complaints, I was surprised when she walked in and said nothing. I thought maybe, just maybe, I had done something right. But then, as I sat down with a cup of coffee, she appeared out of nowhere. "Jessica, your cleaning is too sloppy. You need to spend more time on it and put some gratitude into it for your hardworking husband. As his wife, it's your duty to support him." Her words stung, and I felt my efforts crumble under her scrutiny. I tried to argue, to defend myself, but it was useless. Eleanor had made up her mind about me, and nothing I said or did would change that. It was a lonely feeling, being in a house full of people yet feeling utterly alone. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized how much this situation was affecting me. My confidence had taken a hit, and I was constantly second-guessing myself. I knew something had to change, but I wasn't sure what or how. I just knew I couldn't keep living under Eleanor's shadow, constantly trying to prove myself to someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. I had to admit, the idea of a spa getaway with David had initially filled me with a sense of excitement, a chance for us to rekindle our relationship away from the pressures of his family home. We discussed destinations with soft giggles and whispered dreams, circling dates on the calendar that promised a respite from the cold reality of our daily lives. But my optimism had been a delicate bubble, one that Eleanor effortlessly popped with her intrusive demands. She transformed our intimate plans into a family excursion to celebrate her anniversary with George, David's father. My heart sank when David, caught in his mother's excitement, echoed her sentiments, claiming that a family trip would be just as enjoyable. The promise he'd whispered to me, that next time it would be just the two of us, felt fragile in his earnest reassurances. I agreed, though reluctance weighed on every word, and I threw myself into the trip's preparation, hoping that my efforts would at least be seen and appreciated. I delved into the organization with an energy that surprised even me. Perhaps deep down, it was an attempt to regain some control over a situation that had swiftly slipped from my grasps. I chose the sights we would see, the food we would taste, and the bed where we would lay our heads, quietly taking solace in the small victory that Eleanor seemed disinterested in the logistics. The day before our departure was a whirlwind of activity, of lists checked and bags packed. It was with weary satisfaction that I finally allowed my head to hit the pillow, mentally reviewing the itinerary one last time before succumbing to sleep. My alarm's call the next morning was a harsh one, screaming at me to rise and face the day. But when I stirred, the space beside me was empty, and an uneasy feeling curled in my stomach. I called for David, searched the house, and found only silence as my answer. Panic fluttered in my chest as I reached for my phone, trying to quell the fear with every ring. And then Eleanor answered, her voice echoing cheerfully through the line from the road, removing any doubt about what had happened. They'd left, just as simply as that, with no regard for me or the plans we'd made. My protests were met with mockery and a swift click of finality as the line went dead. So there I was, alone with my luggage and a void where my family was supposed to be. I could have crumbled, I suppose. I could have let the sadness drown me. But instead, I laughed, a sound of disbelief and resolve intermingled. I'll show them, I thought, anger and determination giving rise to a sudden plan. I opened my laptop and with a few clicks, booked myself a trip that mirrored the one I was supposed to be on, a room just for me in a luxury hotel I had wanted to visit, a table for one in a restaurant with glowing reviews. I packed my bag with an enthusiasm that felt both liberating and bittersweet. Stepping out of the house, I felt the sun on my face, a gentle encouragement for the journey ahead. I boarded the train, alone and unyielding in my decision to enjoy this time for myself. As the landscape whisked by, I could feel the threads of my former life loosening, the hold of Eleanor's world diminishing with every mile. I would find my happiness, with or without their approval. And if by chance I crossed paths with the family I had thought was mine, I would hold my head high. They might have denied me a place in their trip, but they couldn't take away my spirit or my joy. As the train neared the final station, I wrapped the shawl tighter around my shoulders, partly against the chill of early morning, and partly in anticipation. The solo trip had not been part of my plan, but it now felt like an act of quiet defiance, a reclaiming of my own narrative. I arrived at the quaint tourist town that was meant to be the backdrop of a romantic trip with David. The glaring absence of his company gave way to a newfound sense of independence. I let my whims direct me, browsing through shops lined with handmade crafts, enjoying the rich aroma of local coffee blends, and laughing with street performers that animated the cobblestone walkways. Every sight was seen through a lens of self-discovery, and every experience felt deeply personal. The weight of the agony caused by Eleanor and David's abandonment began to lift, replaced by a lighter, freer sensation that bubbled within me. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. The day waned, and the evening hues painted the sky, signaling it was time to check into the luxurious hotel I had impulsively booked. I had chosen the best, as a treat to myself for enduring the silent battles at home. As I approached the grand facade, a commotion at the entrance caught my attention. There, among the plush velvet and glinting chandeliers, were Eleanor, David, and George, clearly in distress. I tucked myself behind a decorative pillar, curiosity piqued. Eleanor's voice carried across the lobby, tinged with irritation, wondering aloud why they could not secure a room. Clearly, they hadn't managed to find an accommodation after leaving me behind. David spotted me before I could decide what to do. He called out, a mix of astonishment and guilt flashing across his face as he approached. "Jessica, we couldn't check into the room you booked," he stammered, and Eleanor followed, her face tight with barely contained rage. "Of course you couldn't," I replied with a cool tone I barely recognized as my own. The reservation was in my name, and I hadn't checked in. Without my presence, the keys would remain unclaimed. A simple policy, but effective. Their predicament could have been a satisfying sight, but the joy of their discomfort was overshadowed by a sense of sorrow. This trip was a culmination of the disrespect and disregard they'd shown me since moving into their home. Their petty victory in leaving me behind now seemed like a hollow gain. Eleanor's temper flared as David tried futilely to negotiate with the hotel staff. Ultimately, the sight of them being ushered out by security was more pitiful than amusing. Eleanor vowed to find somewhere better, but her words sounded hollow and desperate. I turned from the scene that was once my family drama and approached the check-in counter, ready for a night of solitude in the peace of an elegant room. With my belongings in tow and my head held high, I stepped across the threshold into the next chapter of my life. One filled with possibilities and untouched by Eleanor's shadow. Turning back was not an option, not now, not after all that had transpired. Checking into the hotel felt like stepping into another world, a sanctuary of luxury and tranquility that seemed almost surreal against the rough fabric of recent events. The room I was escorted to boasted grand windows, an opulent bed, and a balcony that offered a breathtaking view of the setting sun. Alone, I unpacked my suitcase, each article of clothing a reminder of the journey I had embarked upon, both physically and emotionally. I decided to explore the hotel, and as I walked through the elegant corridors, I could feel layers of stress peel off with every step. By the time I returned to the grand lobby, I was transformed, no longer the cast-aside wife, but a woman on an adventure of her own making. As I lounged on a plush sofa, savoring my newfound peace, I overheard a hushed conversation that snatched at my attention. A pair of women discussing a harrowing tale about a nearby hotel with a tarnished reputation. They spoke of thefts, strange noises, and an unsolved mystery of a past guest's untimely death. The details sent a chill across my skin, and I couldn't help but wonder if Eleanor, David, and George had stumbled into that very place in their desperate search for a room. Shaking off the unsettling tale, I made my way to dinner, alone yet content. The meal was sumptuous, each bite an indulgence that soothed more than just hunger. I was celebrating not the dissolution of my family ties, but my resilience, my strength to rise from the emotional quagmire that had threatened to ensnare me. Returning to my room, the night embraced me like an old friend, cocooning me in its velvet quiet. As I prepared for bed, my phone lit up, a call from Eleanor. They had found a room, she crowed, reveling in their small triumph. I bit back a warning about the notorious hotel, my instincts urging caution. But her laughter at my concern quickly trampled any goodwill. "Enjoy being regretful," she jeered before the line went dead. I could have persisted, could have tried to save them from potential peril, but my patience was exhausted. Eleanor had made her bed, and now she'd have to lie in it, be it in a haunted hotel or a bed of roses. I turned off my phone, severing the final tether to the chaos of my old life. That night, as I slept in a bed far too large for one person, I dreamed of freedom, a vast open space waiting for me to fill it with new memories, new laughter, free from the binds of family strife. And as the dawn began to breach the night's darkness, I knew that one chapter of my life had ended, and another was ready to begin. Morning light filtered gently through diaphanous curtains. It coaxed me awake with a gentle warmth, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled in my heart the night before. As I sat up, the previous evening's encounter with David and his family, and the later ominous phone call, replayed in my mind. After a leisurely breakfast, I ventured out again to savor this precious gift of solitude and exploration. I strolled through a nearby park, admired the art in a local gallery, and indulged in some light shopping, allowing the simple pleasure of making decisions solely for myself. As the afternoon sun began to wane, I returned to the warmth of my temporary haven. My mind dwelled on Eleanor's last call, the triumph in her voice as she described the hidden gem of a hotel they had stumbled upon, and my suppressed fears about its rumored dark history. I pushed aside the unsettling thoughts and decided to focus on my present, a reality filled with tranquility and escape from familial conflict. That evening, I dined at the hotel restaurant, where the soft tinkling of piano keys filled the air with melodies of serenity. It was there, amidst the quiet chatter of other diners, that my resolve solidified. I would not allow my newfound peace to be disrupted. Retiring to my room, I mused over the journey of self-discovery that had begun quite unexpectedly. It dawned on me how much I had sublimated my own needs, desires, and identity for the sake of fitting into David's family. They had left me behind, but in doing so, they had unwittingly set me free. And then, my peaceful contemplation was rudely interrupted by the chime of my smartphone. It was Eleanor again, her voice unnaturally bright as she told me about their comfortable hotel stay. Despite the shiver that ran down my spine, I kept my tone light as I recommended caution due to the eerie rumors. Her response was laughter, derisive, confident, and steeped in denial. One last time, the dawn of concern tried to rise within me to warn them of potential dangers. But Eleanor's flippant goodbye silenced my compassion. I was done being the woman who worried about those who had left her in the dust with little more than thinly veiled contempt. The sound of my smartphone powering down reverberated through the silence, like a door closing on that chapter of my life. No longer would I be the doormat for Eleanor's self-righteousness or the tension in David's divided heart. It was time to move forward, to find my place in the world where I could bloom unimpeded by the chill of familial disregard. Sleep found me easily that night, and it was deep, peaceful, void of the nightmarish scenarios that had threatened to haunt me. When I awoke, it was with a clarity and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time to leave, not just the hotel, but everything that represented my old life. As I checked out and stepped onto the train home, I knew without a doubt that I was journeying not just toward a place, but toward a future, crafted by my own design. The train ride back to what had been my home brought a cascade of mixed emotions. Despite the serenity I had discovered within myself during the trip, a sense of foreboding loomed over me as the familiar landscape came into view. I was returning to a place where my presence had become a point of contention, and now I was ready to face whatever awaited me. Upon arriving, the aura of the family home felt different, almost charged with an anxious energy. The light that spilled from the windows seemed harsh, a beacon that screamed of tumult rather than the warmth of a welcome. With every step I took towards the door, determination steeled my resolve. "I'm home," I announced, as casually as I could manage, pushing the door open. The reaction was immediate. My presence stirred the occupants into a frenzy of exclamations and finger-pointing. As the noise died down, Eleanor relayed the story of their nightmarish stay in a fearful, breathless torrent. They had spent the night in the very hotel that had been the subject of terrifying rumors, the same one I had warned Eleanor about. When she recounted how their belongings had been stolen, with the hotel staff dismissive and unhelpful, I couldn't help but wonder if their experiences were a direct result of their earlier vanities. David and Eleanor rounded on me, blaming their misfortune on my earlier inaction, their words sharp and accusatory. "If only you had told us more seriously to run," Eleanor seethed, while David's gaze carried the weight of disappointment. The blame was unjust and ironic. If I had been part of the trip as originally planned, we would have all avoided the appalling situation that befell them. When I pointed this out, David's temper flared, and with it came the words that finally broke us apart. "We're getting a divorce," he declared, his face red with anger and frustration. Shock took hold for a moment before I regained my composure. I moved to our bedroom and retrieved the divorce papers that had been, until now, a hidden safeguard, a silent acknowledgement of the potential implosion of our marriage. Laying them out like a final gambit, I watched as David's anger gave way to disbelief. "We'll handle this like adults," I stated, the calm in my voice belying the earthquake that had just shaken my world. David's feet were rooted to the spot, unsure, while Eleanor capered around him, emboldened as ever, pushing her dispirited son to cut ties with me. And so, the life I had known with David and his parents crumbled to dust. Before long, the divorce was final, and the page had turned on a painful chapter that had defined my existence for far too long. In the wake of our separation, Eleanor's glee was short-lived. Word of the events traveled through whispers and gazes within the community, tarnishing her image. No longer was she the matriarch of a revered household. She became a harbinger of discord. I packed my things and left without looking back, my heart an odd mixture of ache and anticipation. I accepted the finality of my departure as the house I had tried in vain to make a home faded into the background of my train window view. For the first time in a long while, I was master of my destiny. With the help of friends, I began rebuilding my life in my hometown, starting anew, free from the clutches of an oppressive family dynamic. I embraced my singlehood, reveling in the quiet freedom it brought, freedom to breathe, to exist, to be me without restriction or disapproval. Back in the town where I grew up, I took up a new job, reconnecting with parts of myself that had been long buried beneath the role I had played as David's wife. I was rediscovering who I was, reclaiming the pieces of my identity that had been chipped away by years of servitude to someone else's happiness. For now, marriage was a closed book, set upon a high shelf to be perhaps revisited in the far future. But in the present moment I was content. Content to let the tapestry of my life weave new patterns, ones that held the promise of hope, self-respect, and endless possibilities. The cool air of my hometown was a balm to my soul as I stepped off the train. After the tumult of the past few days, the familiar sights and sounds wrapped around me like a comforting embrace. I had come full circle, returning to the place I had once been eager to leave, seeking new adventures. Now it offered the promise of a fresh start. I moved into a small apartment downtown, a humble space, but it was mine, and the privacy felt like luxury after years under Eleanor's scrutinizing gaze. My new job, secured through a friend's referral, was a role at a local nonprofit, a stark contrast to the part-time supermarket position that Eleanor had looked down upon. In the evenings after work, I would walk along the riverbank, the flowing water mirroring the thoughts racing through my mind. I reflected on my marriage with David and my interactions with his family. There was a time when I doubted my actions, when Eleanor's comments made me second-guess myself. But here, in the solitude of nature, I found a sense of inner peace. I wasn't the woman Eleanor had painted me to be. I was resilient, capable, and now truly free. I reconnected with old friends, and the sense of belonging they provided was restorative. We shared meals, stories, and laughter, a stark contrast to the forced dinners at Eleanor's table. With each passing day, the hurt diminished, and in its place grew a newfound sense of self-confidence. As weeks turned into months, the pieces of my new life fell into place. The job was fulfilling, offering a sense of purpose that extended beyond the paycheck. The work I did mattered, and I felt valued, a stark contrast to the feelings of inadequacy I had endured for so long. Word reached me at times about how things were faring in my old life. David, who had been so determined in his decision to divorce, seemed lost without the woman he had once deemed unworthy. Eleanor's reputation had suffered greatly, and her social circle had dwindled. The schadenfreude I expected it to feel never materialized. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief that I was no longer entwined in their narrative. My evenings were spent on hobbies that had been neglected, reading books, painting, and attending local theater productions. I dove into these activities with gusto, savoring the joy they brought with a childlike delight I hadn't felt in years. Eventually, the inquiries came. Well-meaning friends and family nudged me towards the dating scene, but I was content to remain single. The scars of my marriage and subsequent divorce had healed, but they had taught me invaluable lessons about love, respect, and most importantly, the strength of my own spirit. So, as I closed the door on the past and looked to the future, I did so with a heart full of hope. The road ahead was unpaved and uncertain, but it was mine to traverse, laden with opportunities yet to be discovered, dreams yet to be fulfilled, and a chance at happiness that was entirely my own. I allowed myself one last look back, not in regret but in acknowledgement of all I had overcome. Then I turned away, striding confidently towards whatever tomorrow would bring, knowing that whatever it was, with my resilient heart and my unyielding will, was ready to meet it head-on. In the quiet of my bedroom, I, Emily Martin, a 36-year-old homemaker, sat reflecting on the years I had spent in this house. The walls, once symbols of love and security, now felt like barriers trapping me in a world of deception and unspoken truths. I had married Michael, a man destined to take over his family's prestigious spa resort. His family's legacy was not just a business. It was a beacon in the hospitality industry, a name synonymous with luxury and exclusivity. Our marriage, initially a fairy tale, began to reveal its cracks when I became pregnant. Michael, always the dutiful son and aspiring business mogul, had little time or patience for the nuances of our growing family. His family's obsession with a male heir to continue the legacy loomed over us like a dark cloud. When I discovered I was pregnant, Michael's reaction was a cocktail of relief and unbridled expectation. "A boy, Emily. We need a boy," he said, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of hope and unspoken pressure. I remember feeling a knot in my stomach, not from the pregnancy, but from the weight of his words. The thought, "What if it's a girl?" haunted my nights, robbing me of my sleep and peace. Throughout my pregnancy, Michael's presence became more phantom-like. His priorities were clear: the resort and its future. My health checkups, the preparations for our child, the emotional roller coaster I was on, I faced them alone. The day we found out we were having a boy should have been a celebration. Instead, it felt like passing an exam. A relief, but not a joy. My successor, Michael had said, a statement more than an expression of affection. His infrequent presence at home was marked by criticisms and reminders of the responsibility I carried. I was more a vessel for the heir than his wife. My health deteriorated under the stress. Morning sickness was my constant companion, often leaving me weak and exhausted. Michael's family upheld a tradition of dining together, a practice Michael insisted on. But as my condition worsened, so did his patience. Dramatic, he called it, dismissing my suffering as an overreaction. The day our son was born was the day my illusion shattered completely. I lay there, exhausted yet elated, holding our baby, a beautiful boy with Michael's eyes. Michael stood there, not with warmth, but with a sense of accomplishment. He did not reach for my hand or share a tear of joy. He was there, yet he wasn't. The first time he held our son, his touch was tentative, as if he was holding his future rather than his flesh and blood. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed, cradling our son, Michael dropped the bombshell. "Emily, now that the heir is born, your role is fulfilled. I think it's best if you leave. We can't afford a freeloader." His words, cold and calculated, hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, my heart breaking, not just for me, but for the innocent life I held in my arms. In that moment, I realized the painful truth. To Michael, I was never a partner, never truly his wife. I was a means to an end, a step in his plan. As I looked into the eyes of our son, I knew I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for him. I would leave, yes, but not as a defeated, discarded wife. I would leave on my terms, with my head held high. Michael had awakened something in me, a strength I didn't know I had. I would ensure that he regretted the day he underestimated Emily Martin. The hospital room felt colder than usual that night. As I lay there, holding my newborn son, the echoes of Michael's harsh words replayed in my mind. Freeloader, he had called me, a term so alien yet so cutting. I looked down at my son, his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. In his innocence, I found my resolve. I wouldn't let Michael's cruelty define our lives. The days following were a blur of paperwork, formalities, and silent tears. My parents, unaware of the full extent of my marital strife, were shocked when I showed up at their doorstep, a baby in my arms and a heart full of sorrow. "Mom, Dad, I need some time," I said, my voice barely a whisper. They didn't press for answers, for which I was grateful. That night, as I lay in my old bed, the reality of my situation began to sink in. Michael had not only abandoned me, but also his son. Days turned into weeks. I found solace in the familiarity of my childhood home, the unconditional love of my parents, and the innocent smiles of my son. Yet beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. I couldn't forget Michael's betrayal, nor could I forgive it. His words had ignited a fire within me, a desire to not just survive but to thrive, and to make him regret his callousness. I started plotting my course of revenge, each plan more meticulous than the last. My days were spent caring for my son, and my nights in strategizing. Michael, in his arrogance, had underestimated me, a mistake I intended to use to my advantage. It wasn't long before I received a frantic call from Michael. His voice, once confident and commanding, was now tinged with desperation. "Emily, please come back. I didn't realize how hard this would be," he pleaded. I listened, a cold smile playing on my lips. Michael, the heir to a luxury resort empire, was crumbling under the weight of responsibilities he had never bothered to share with me. His pleas for help, his admissions of struggle, were music to my ears. This was the man who had reduced me to nothing more than a freeloader, now unable to cope with the reality of his own life. "Michael, we are done," I said firmly, the finality in my voice unmistakable. "You made your choice, and now you must live with it." I hung up, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and exhilaration. I had drawn the first blood in this silent war, and it was both terrifying and liberating. That night, as I held my son, I made a promise to both him and myself. We would not be victims of Michael's cruelty. We would rise from this, stronger and more resilient. Michael had started this war, but I would be the one to end it. The following weeks were a testament to the strength I didn't know I possessed. Each day with my son was a reminder of what truly mattered, and each night, as he slept peacefully, I crafted my plan to ensure Michael paid for his betrayal. His calls became more frequent, each one more desperate than the last, but they only fueled my resolve. Michael's pleas turned into bargaining, then into threats, as he slowly realized I wasn't going to relent. "You can't do this to me, Emily, I need you," he would say. But his words, once capable of swaying me, now fell on deaf ears. I was no longer the woman he thought he could easily discard. I began to reach out to allies, both within and outside of Michael's influential circle. To my surprise, many were appalled by his actions, their sympathy quickly turning into support for my cause. It was as if Michael, in his arrogance, had underestimated not only me, but the relationships I had cultivated over the years. As the days passed, my plans started taking shape. I knew that to win this battle, I needed more than just emotional victories. I needed to secure my and my son's future. Legal consultations, financial planning, and quiet inquiries into Michael's business dealings became part of my daily routine. Then one evening, as I was putting my son to bed, my phone rang. It was Michael again, but this time his tone was different, broken, defeated. "Emily, I can't do this. The baby won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do. Please, come back." I felt a twinge of pity, quickly overshadowed by the memory of his harsh words and colder actions. "You wanted to be a father, Michael. Now you're learning what it means to be one," I replied, my voice steady. I could hear the frustration in his breath, the clenching of his teeth. "I'll do anything, Emily, please." "Anything?" I asked, a plan forming in my mind. "We'll see." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that my feelings for Michael had completely evaporated, replaced by a cold indifference. The man I once loved was now nothing more than a stranger to me, a stranger I was prepared to stand against. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings. I knew it would be a battle, but I was ready to fight for my son, for our future, and for the justice we deserved. Michael had awakened a side of me I never knew existed, and now there was no turning back. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal appointments, strategic planning, and an unwavering focus on my goal. My resolve had turned into a shield, protecting both my son and me from the chaos that Michael had unleashed in our lives. The divorce proceedings were initiated, and with each step, I felt a sense of empowerment growing within me. Michael's attempts to reconcile were relentless, but they only strengthened my determination. He was no longer the confident businessman who had dismissed me so callously. He was now a man grasping at straws, trying to salvage a situation he had created. One particularly poignant moment came when I had to meet Michael for a mediation session. As I sat across from him, I saw a man broken by his own arrogance. He pleaded, bargained, and even broke down, but the image of him standing in the hospital room telling me I was no longer needed remained etched in my mind. "I'll change, Emily. I swear I didn't realize what I had until I lost it," Michael implored. But it was too late. I had seen the true Michael, and there was no going back. "You've already shown me who you are, Michael. I can't unsee that," I replied calmly. As the legal battle ensued, Michael's true nature became public. His inability to manage his personal life started affecting his professional one. The spa resort, his family's legacy, began to feel the strain of his distracted leadership. Then came the day of reckoning. The divorce was finalized, granting me full custody of our son and a substantial alimony settlement. Michael's reaction was one of disbelief and despair. He had lost not just his wife and son, but also a significant portion of his wealth. But the final blow came from his own family. Disappointed by his actions and the negative impact on their business, they decided to remove him from his position at the resort. His fall from grace was not just personal, but professional as well. Michael, once a man of influence and power, was now struggling to find his footing. He tried to reach out, to appeal to my emotions, but I had moved beyond the reach of his words. As I watched Michael's descent, I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice. He had underestimated me, treated me as a mere stepping stone in his path. Now, he was paying the price for his arrogance and insensitivity. With my son by my side and a newfound strength within me, I stepped into a future of possibilities. Michael's downfall was not just a victory for me. It was a lesson in resilience and the power of standing up for oneself. The closing of the courtroom door behind me felt like the final note in a long, tumultuous symphony. As I walked away, holding my son's hand, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. The battle with Michael was over, and I had emerged not just victorious, but transformed. In the months that followed, I established a new life for myself and my son. We moved into a modest but cozy home, a place where laughter replaced the echoes of past arguments and tears. Each room was filled with the promise of a new beginning, a sanctuary from the storms we had weathered. My days were busy but fulfilling. I re-entered the workforce, finding a job that not only supported us but also brought me a sense of accomplishment and independence. The gap in my resume as a full-time homemaker did pose challenges, but my determination and newly found confidence helped me overcome them. As I watched my son play in our new living room, his giggles a balm to my once weary soul, I realized how much we had both grown. He was no longer the silent witness to a crumbling marriage, but a happy, thriving child, basking in the love and stability of our new life. Michael, on the other hand, became a distant memory, a chapter in my life that was closed and shelved away. The last I heard, he was doing odd jobs, a far cry from the luxurious life he was once accustomed to. His family, having disowned him, no longer provided the financial safety net he had always relied on. There were moments of guilt, fleeting shadows of what was once compassion for the man I married, but they were quickly overshadowed by the memory of his words and actions. Michael was no longer my responsibility, nor my concern. Life had taught me a harsh but valuable lesson: the importance of self-worth. I had learned to stand up for myself, to demand respect and fairness in a relationship. This journey, fraught with pain and betrayal, had led me to a place of strength and peace. My son's laughter brought me back to the present. I joined him on the floor, building a castle out of blocks, each one representing a piece of our new life. As we played, I made a silent promise to him and to myself, to cherish this happiness, to nurture it, and to never let anyone take it away from us again. In this new era of our lives, we had found not just peace, but a deeper, more resilient joy. We were no longer just survivors, we were thriving, building a future filled with hope and endless possibilities. I'm Elizabeth Martin, a 45-year-old marketing manager. My life, though busy and sometimes challenging, has always been fulfilling. I work for a well-established company, and despite the occasional high-pressure situation, I find deep satisfaction in my work. My husband Richard is a kind man at heart, but his priorities have always been a bit skewed. From the beginning of our marriage, he's shown a peculiar devotion to his sister Eleanor and her daughter Sophie. At first, I tried to be understanding. Family is important, after all. But as years went by, I began to feel more like an outsider in my own marriage. Eleanor, Richard's older sister, has been a constant presence in our lives. She's a single mother to Sophie, a lively teenager. Richard often involves them in our plans, sometimes even prioritizing their needs over ours. I've grown used to the last-minute cancellations of our plans because Eleanor needed something. I remember the early days of our marriage when I tried to voice my concerns. Richard would listen, but his actions never changed. I gradually stopped complaining, realizing it was a battle I couldn't win. In a way, I empathized with Richard's sense of obligation. Eleanor had supported him financially during his college years, a fact he often recounted with a mix of gratitude and guilt. Eleanor's story was no fairy tale either. She married young, but soon found herself in a difficult marriage. Her husband, more interested in his career, wanted her to be a stay-at-home mom. When she finally divorced, her financial situation became strained. Richard stepped in as the supportive brother, something I initially admired. But admiration can slowly morph into resentment when the scales are too unbalanced. Our life together was peaceful, yet I often felt alone. Richard's idea of a weekend well spent involved dining out with Eleanor and Sophie, leaving me behind with my thoughts and a quiet house. The turning point came 3 months ago. Richard approached me one evening with a grave look on his face. "Eleanor's getting a divorce," he said, his voice laced with concern. "She's decided to keep custody of Sophie." I knew Eleanor's marriage was rocky, but the news still caught me off guard. Eleanor, with her sharp tongue and haughty attitude, was difficult for me to be around. I recalled our first meeting at Richard's family home, where she had openly mocked my appearance and taste. No one, not even Richard, had come to my defense. Richard's next words were like a punch to the gut. I'm going to be spending more time at their place, he announced. Unlike you, Eleanor is delicate. She needs me. His words stung, but I swallowed my pride and simply nodded. Arguing would only push him further into Eleanor's arms. Take care, I said, forcing a smile as he left. His absence grew more noticeable. Weekends became a solo affair, and even weekdays were spent alone. I'd return from work to an empty, dark home. The loneliness was suffocating. Then one day, Richard was unexpectedly at home when I arrived, but the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. You haven't given Eleanor a housewarming gift yet, he accused. You're getting a bonus soon, right? Buy her something nice, like a designer bag. I was stunned. Why should I be the one to give a gift? Why don't you do it, Richard? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He became irate, lecturing me on family values and obligations. The conversation left me emotionally drained and deeply hurt. Richard's family seemed to be his only priority, and I was merely an afterthought. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. You heard from Richard, didn't you? It's normal to give a housewarming gift, she said, her tone entitled. I couldn't hold back. You never gave us a wedding gift, I countered. Not even a congratulations. Her response was cold. You're Richard's wife. You're supposed to honor me, not the other way around. Her audacity left me speechless. In all my years with Richard, I had never felt so disrespected. It was a wake-up call. I realized that I deserved better, that I couldn't spend the rest of my life in the shadows of someone else's family. That night, as I lay in bed, a plan began to form in my mind. It was time for a change. It was time for me to step out of the shadows and into the light. As the sun peeked through the blinds the next morning, I felt a new sense of determination. Over breakfast, Richard, oblivious to my inner turmoil, talked about his plans to help Eleanor move into her new apartment. I listened, nodding where appropriate, but my mind was elsewhere. Later that day at work, I couldn't shake off the feeling of discontent. My job, which had always been a source of pride and joy, now felt like the only aspect of my life where I had any control. I wondered how I had allowed myself to become so marginal in my own marriage. That evening, Richard didn't come home. It wasn't unusual anymore. I sat alone in the living room, the TV chattering in the background, providing a semblance of company. I realized that this emptiness had become my norm, a stark contrast to the lively, love-filled home I had once envisioned. Weeks passed in a similar pattern. Richard's visits home became more sporadic, and when he was home, his mind seemed elsewhere. Our conversations, once filled with shared dreams and laughter, were now reduced to logistical exchanges. One day, I returned home earlier than usual to find Richard waiting for me. He had a strange look in his eyes, a mix of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. Elizabeth, there's something I need to tell you, he began hesitantly. My heart raced, anticipating more bad news. Eleanor's divorce has taken a toll on her. She's struggling to cope, and I think we should help her more, he said. I felt a sense of déjà vu, another request to put his sister's needs above our own. What do you mean by help her more? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Richard took a deep breath. I think Eleanor and Sophie should move in with us for a while. Our house is bigger, and they need the support. I was speechless. The idea of Eleanor and Sophie, with their entitled attitudes, living in our home was unthinkable. Yet I knew arguing would be futile. Richard had made up his mind, and my opinion seemed irrelevant. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The thought of sharing my home with Eleanor and Sophie filled me with dread. It wasn't just about the invasion of my space, it was a symbol of how little my feelings mattered in this marriage. The following week, movers arrived with boxes of Eleanor and Sophie's belongings. I watched as my home transformed into a storage unit for their lives. Each box that entered felt like another piece of my sanctuary being taken away. As the movers left, I sat amidst the clutter, feeling more alone than ever. It was clear that Richard's family would always come first, and I was just a bystander in my own life. It was then that I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to make a change, for my own sanity and happiness. I had to find the courage to step out of the shadow of Richard's family and reclaim my life. As I pondered my next steps, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't continue living in a home that no longer felt like mine. I needed to find a place where I could be myself, free from the burden of being the unacknowledged partner in my own marriage. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in our house shifted dramatically. Eleanor and Sophie's presence was overwhelming, their personalities and habits encroaching on every aspect of my once peaceful home. Richard seemed more distant than ever, his attention fully consumed by his sister and niece. I started spending more time at work, often staying late to avoid returning to a house that no longer felt like mine. My colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor, but I brushed off their concerns with a smile and a shrug. Inside, I felt a growing sense of despair. One evening, as I finally mustered the courage to return home, I found Richard waiting for me, a stern look on his face. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he said, his tone devoid of warmth. My heart sank. "What is it, Richard?" I asked, bracing myself for what was to come. "It's about Eleanor and Sophie," he began. "They're going through a tough time, and I think we need to do more to support them." I felt a flash of anger. "More?" I echoed incredulously. "Richard, they've already taken over our home. What more do you expect from me?" He frowned, his patience wearing thin. "I expect you to be a part of this family, Elizabeth. That means supporting each other, no matter what." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My role in this family had been reduced to a mere supporter, an afterthought in my own life. "And what about us, Richard? What about our marriage?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. He avoided my gaze. "This is important to me, Elizabeth. You need to understand that." The conversation went in circles, with Richard refusing to acknowledge my feelings. It was clear that his loyalty lay with Eleanor and Sophie, and I was just an accessory in his life. That night, I lay awake in bed, a mix of emotions churning inside me. I felt betrayed, neglected, and utterly alone. It was a painful realization, but I knew that my marriage as I had known it was over. The next day, I made a decision. I would no longer be a bystander in my own life. I started searching for a new place to live, a haven where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. It wasn't easy. The thought of leaving the home I had built with Richard was daunting, but the prospect of staying in a loveless marriage was far worse. After several weeks of searching, I found a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was modest, but it was mine. I signed the lease with a mixture of fear and excitement. I didn't tell Richard about my plans. I knew he wouldn't understand, and I no longer cared to seek his approval. I began packing my belongings in secret, each item a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The day I moved out, Richard was at work. I left him a note, explaining that I needed space and time to think about our future. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done, but as I closed the door to our house for the last time, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The first few nights in my new apartment were filled with a mix of emotions. The quiet was both unsettling and liberating. I missed the familiarity of my old home, but I relished the freedom of my new space. This small apartment was a blank canvas, a place where I could start painting a new chapter in my life. As I unpacked my belongings, each item evoked a memory, a piece of the life I had shared with Richard. Some brought smiles, others tears. But with each box I emptied, I felt lighter, as if shedding the weight of years of unacknowledged feelings and unmet needs. The following week at work, my colleagues noticed the change in me. "You seem different, Elizabeth," one of them commented. "Lighter, somehow." I smiled, realizing that the decision to leave had not only changed my living situation, but had also started to change me. "I guess I am," I replied. Richard's reaction to my departure was a mix of confusion and frustration. He called several times, leaving messages that ranged from pleading to angry. I listened to each one, my resolve strengthening with his every word. One evening he showed up at my office, unannounced. "Elizabeth, we need to talk," he said, his face a picture of bewilderment and concern. I agreed to talk, but on my terms. We met at a nearby cafe, a neutral space where I felt more in control. "Why did you leave?" Richard asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I needed space, Richard," I replied calmly. "Space to think, to breathe, to be myself." He struggled to understand, his mind still entangled in the obligations to his sister and niece. "But we're a family," he insisted. "You can't just walk away from that." I shook my head. "A family should be a partnership, Richard. It's about mutual respect and understanding. I haven't felt that in a long time." Our conversation circled, with Richard trying to persuade me to return and me standing firm in my decision. It was clear that we were at an impasse, our paths diverging after years of walking side by side. After we parted ways, I walked back to my apartment, feeling a sense of peace. The conversation had confirmed that I had made the right decision. For the first time in years, I was choosing myself, my happiness. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, my new apartment began to feel like home. I decorated it with things that brought me joy, colors that lifted my spirits, and pictures that reflected my journey. I also started to explore new interests, joining a local book club and signing up for a pottery class. These activities brought new people into my life, people who knew me as Elizabeth, not as Richard's wife. I was rediscovering parts of myself that I had long forgotten or neglected. In this newfound freedom, I also found the courage to reflect on my marriage. I acknowledged the good times we had shared, but I also faced the painful truth of how unbalanced it had become. It was a bittersweet realization, but it was essential for my growth. As I lay in bed one night, listening to the soft hum of the city outside my window, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, grateful for the courage to make a change, grateful for the lessons learned, and most of all, grateful for the chance to rediscover myself. The autonomy of living on my own brought a clarity I hadn't realized I was missing. Each day, I grew more comfortable with my decision, feeling more like the protagonist in my life story, rather than a supporting character in someone else's. However, this new chapter was not without its challenges. A couple of months into my solo journey, I received a call that would once again shift the course of my life. It was from a private investigator I had discreetly hired after moving out, prompted by a nagging suspicion about Richard's increasingly odd behavior and absences. The investigator's findings were a harsh blow. Richard had been having an affair. The revelation was both shocking and oddly liberating. It explained so much of his recent behavior, the distance, the preoccupation. The pieces of a puzzle I didn't know I was assembling suddenly fell into place. Armed with this information, I confronted Richard. He was stunned, unprepared for my newfound assertiveness and the evidence I presented. His apologies and excuses fell on deaf ears. The betrayal was the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. I initiated the divorce proceedings, a process that was both painful and empowering. The legalities were complex, but I navigated them with a newfound resolve, fueled by the desire to close this chapter of my life. Richard's reaction to the divorce ranged from disbelief to anger, and finally, the revelation of his affair had consequences beyond our marriage. It affected his reputation, his relationships with friends and family, and most significantly, his relationship with Eleanor and Sophie. Eleanor and Sophie's reaction to the news was a mixture of shock and denial. They had placed Richard on a pedestal, and the revelation that he was capable of such deception shattered their image of him. As the divorce finalized, I found myself on the other side of a journey I never expected to take. I was now a single woman, with a past that was a mix of fond memories and painful lessons. But more importantly, I was a woman who had found her voice, her strength, and her independence. The settlement from the divorce, including alimony, was fair but hardly a windfall. It was not about the money, it was about the acknowledgement of my worth and the years I had invested in a marriage that ultimately failed me. Post-divorce, Richard's life took a downturn. His affair had not only cost him his marriage, but also his reputation. The ripple effects were evident in his professional life, and soon he left his job. For me, life after divorce was about rediscovery. I continued exploring new hobbies and interests, building a network of friends who valued me for who I was, not for my marital status or who I was married to. The freedom of this new life was exhilarating. I traveled, I read, I created. I lived on my terms, with no apologies or excuses. The world, once so narrow and confined, now seemed vast and full of possibilities. As I settled into my new normal, I realized that the end of my marriage was not just an ending, but also a beginning. A beginning of a life where I was the author, where each day was a blank page waiting to be filled with my story, written in my words. Life has a way of testing you, offering lessons wrapped in unexpected envelopes. Just when I thought I had severed all ties with my past, it came knocking on my door in the form of Eleanor and Sophie. I received a message from Sophie, now a young adult. her tone desperate. "Aunt Elizabeth, we need your help. Things have been really tough since you left." I paused upon reading it, a whirlwind of emotions overtaking me. Part of me felt obliged to respond, to offer some assistance, but another part, the part that had fought so hard to establish boundaries and to gain self-respect, resisted. It took some time and self-reflection, but I decided not to reply to Sophie's message. This was their battle to fight, not mine. I had already spent too many years sacrificing my own well-being for the sake of Richard and his family. Eleanor also reached out, her voice laced with the same haughty tone that had always made me bristle. "Elizabeth, we're in a real bind here. I never thought I'd have to ask, but we need financial help." I could hardly believe it. After everything that had transpired, Eleanor still expected me to come to their rescue. It was a stark reminder of the dynamic that had existed in our relationships for all those years. My decision stood firm. "Eleanor, I wish you and Sophie well, but I cannot help you," I said as calmly as I could. There was silence on the line, followed by a string of accusations and insults, reminiscent of so many past conversations. I ended the call and blocked their numbers, severing the last threads of a bond that had brought me little but pain and diminishment. My heart raced with a mixture of guilt and empowerment, signaling the end of an era. At that moment, I knew I had truly turned a page. I felt a complete detachment from the life I once knew, a life where I was unseen and unheard. That night, as I lay in bed, I considered the full weight of the step I had taken. There was a profound sense of finality in my refusal, a clear line drawn between my past and my present. In the silence of my apartment, I pondered the journey that had led me to this point. There was a haunting loneliness in recognizing that I was now entirely on my own, that the family I had once been part of, for better or worse, was now nothing but a part of my history. Yet, with the loneliness came a powerful realization of my strength and independence. I no longer needed the approval or validation of others to feel worthy. I was my own person, standing on my own ground, guided by my own principles and desires. The next morning I awoke with a newfound sense of peace. I had faced my past head-on, and in doing so, I had found a deeper sense of self. It was a freedom born not just from my new life, but from the recognition of my inner resilience and the courage to uphold my boundaries. The dawn of each new day greeted me with a promise, a whisper of the untold possibilities that lay ahead. My journey, marked by turmoil and triumph, had led me to embrace solitude, not as a burden but as a companion. With each sunrise I grew more attuned to the rhythms of my own heart, my life now a melody composed of my choices and desires. In the solitude of my new chapter, I sought a friend, a non-judgmental companion to share the quiet moments that bookended my days of self-discovery. The idea of adopting a dog began as a whisper in my mind, a gentle nudge that grew louder with time. One brisk Saturday morning I walked into the local animal shelter, a sense of mission guiding my steps. The cacophony of barks and whimpers could have been overwhelming, but instead it felt like a chorus of hope of second chances. My gaze met a pair of soulful brown eyes belonging to a middle-aged beagle mix with an earnest expression. He wagged his tail tentatively, as if unsure of his place in the world, much like I had been. It was a connection that needed no words. I knew he was the one. I named him Max, and together we embarked on the next leg of our journey, both of us seeking love and acceptance in a new beginning. In the company of Max, my home, once a silent space, filled with the soft patter of paws and the comforting presence of another beating heart. Our walks became a meditative ritual, a time to reflect on the path traveled and to revel in the simple joy of being alive, of being free. Looking back, the road I had traveled seemed intricately woven with pain and purpose. I often pondered on the lessons learned, the tears shed, and the laughter echoed in the corridors of time. Above all, I had learned the paramount importance of self-care and independence, the foundations upon which my new life was built. Freedom had been a costly pursuit, both emotionally and financially, but its rewards were immeasurable. I no longer saw myself through the lens of others, but rather through my own understanding of who I was and who I wanted to be. Some nights, Max and I would sit by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the vast canvas of the sky. In those moments of quiet companionship, I realized that while the future was unwritten, I approached it not with trepidation, but with curiosity and a sense of adventure. I had indeed come a long way, from the unacknowledged partner to a woman of resilience and substance. My journey bore witness to the metamorphosis of a soul from the shackles of neglect to the wings of autonomy. As I pen down these final words, the chapter of my rebirth draws to a close. Yet, the story of Elizabeth Martin is far from over. With Max by my side and a heart open to life's infinite tapestry, I step forward, a weaver of my own destiny. I remember the day I moved in with Michael and his parents. It was a sunny morning in June, the kind that held promises of new beginnings. Michael and I had been dating for a year, and everything about our relationship felt right. We were young, in love, and ready to start a new chapter together. The move was significant for me. Leaving my small hometown and moving 5 hours away to live with Michael was a leap of faith. My parents were supportive, but cautious, reminding me to always keep my independence in mind. Michael had asked for their blessing, which they gave after many heart-to-heart conversations. His parents' house was a cozy 2-story building with a welcoming porch and a well-tended garden. The first time I visited, I was struck by its warmth. Michael's parents, Linda and Robert, greeted me with open arms. Linda was a petite woman with a smile that lit up the room, and Robert was a tall, jovial man who could make anyone laugh within minutes of meeting him. I felt a connection with them instantly. During those early visits, Linda and I would spend hours chatting in the kitchen, baking cookies, or preparing dinner. She had a way of making everything seem effortless, and I admired her for that. Robert was equally engaging, always ready with a story or a joke, making sure everyone around him was having a good time. Moving in felt like the natural next step. Michael and I talked about it for months, and when the day finally came, it was exciting. My stuff fit into the room Michael and I shared, and his parents made sure I felt welcome. Linda hugged me tightly, saying, "Welcome to the family, dear." The first few weeks were like living in a dream. I was getting along great with Michael's parents. We had family dinners every night, where we shared stories and laughed over Robert's jokes. Linda would sometimes whisper advice about handling Michael's quirks, and I found her insights invaluable. I noticed how they all worked as a unit, and I did my best to fit into their rhythm. I helped with chores, trying not to step on anyone's toes. Michael seemed happy, and seeing him in his element, surrounded by his family, made me love him even more. However, as weeks turned into months, the initial excitement started to wane. I began noticing little things, subtle shifts in behavior that I hadn't picked up on before. It was nothing major at first, just a sense of something being slightly off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt a change in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. I shrugged it off initially, attributing it to the adjustment phase of living together. But as more time passed, these small changes began to form a pattern, one that I couldn't ignore for long. It was the beginning of what would become a challenging journey, one that would test my strength, my relationship, and my understanding of what it means to be part of a family. As autumn set in, the warmth of the summer months seemed to fade, not just outside, but within the walls of the house as well. The subtle changes I had noticed earlier were becoming more pronounced, more frequent. It was as if a different side of Linda and Robert was slowly revealing itself, one I hadn't seen before. One evening, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes after dinner. It was something I had done many times before, but this time something was different. I had stepped away for a moment, leaving a couple of my dishes in the sink. When I returned, I found that Linda had washed everything else but had left my dishes untouched, set aside as if they were somehow separate, unclean. At first, I thought it might have been an oversight, but it happened again, and then again. It wasn't just the dishes. It was little things, like Linda moving my belongings to a corner of the room, or Robert making offhand comments about my job or my habits. It was never anything overtly hostile, but it stung all the same. I tried to talk to Michael about it to see if he had noticed anything. His response was always the same, a shrug and a quick, "That's just how they are, they don't mean anything by it." But I wasn't convinced. It felt personal, intentional. One incident intentional. One incident in particular left a deep mark. It was a simple, casual cruelty, the kind that slices through you because it comes when your guard is down. I was serving Michael his dinner when Linda, with a pointed look, asked, "You're eating again?" Her tone was light, almost joking, but the implication was clear. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and shame. I had always been self-conscious about my weight, a fact that Linda knew. Her comment hit me hard, and from that day on I started skipping meals, eating only when I was sure I was alone. The joy I once found in cooking and sharing meals with the family vanished, replaced by anxiety and a deepening sense of isolation. Michael didn't notice, or if he did, he never said anything. It felt as though I was becoming invisible in my own home, my presence tolerated rather than welcomed. The relationship I had thought so fondly of with Linda and Robert was crumbling, and I couldn't understand why. I started spending more time in our room, away from the family. The house, once a symbol of a new chapter in my life with Michael, now felt like a trap, confining and cold. I felt alone, misunderstood, and increasingly unwanted. I clung to the belief that this was just a phase, that things would get better with time. But deep down, I knew that something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer just Michael's girlfriend. I was an outsider, living under the same roof but feeling miles apart. The growing tension in the house was like a silent storm, brewing beneath the surface, waiting to break. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, that storm would soon find its voice in ways I could never have anticipated. Winter arrived with its short days and long, cold nights, mirroring the growing chill inside the house. The unease I felt around Linda was now compounded by a new, more unsettling problem: Robert's behavior. Robert, once the jovial storyteller, began showing a side of himself that was far less amiable, especially after he'd had a few drinks. His humor, which I once found endearing, turned biting and cruel. He'd make offhand remarks about people's appearances, often focusing on their weight, and laugh it off as though it were all in good fun. But the laughter never reached his eyes. One evening, his comments became personal. He made a joke about my weight in front of Michael and his friends. I excused myself quickly, holding back tears until I was safely in the bathroom. Michael came to check on me later, brushing off his father's words as just Dad being Dad. But it was more than that. It was humiliation, served coldly and publicly. The incident that truly shook me happened when Michael was out of town for work. I was taking a shower, lost in thought, when I heard the bathroom door handle jiggle. I had locked the door, a habit I had formed since moving in. Through the frosted glass, I saw Robert's silhouette. He knocked, his voice slurred, asking if I needed help. I replied sharply that I was fine, but my heart was racing. The thought of what might have happened if I hadn't locked the door sent shivers down my spine. I confronted Michael about it when he returned, but he seemed unable to grasp the severity of the situation. He assured me it was a misunderstanding, that his dad probably just didn't realize I was in the shower. But I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the sense that I wasn't safe in my own home. Amidst all this, I continued to help Linda and Robert with their needs. I assisted Linda with her medical paperwork, drove her to appointments 2 hours away, and even missed classes to be there for her. For Robert, I helped with their immigration papers, communicating with lawyers and organizing documents. I poured myself into these tasks, hoping to bridge the growing gap between us. But my efforts seemed to go unnoticed, or worse, unappreciated. The more I did, the more I felt like I was being used, a means to an end rather than a valued member of the family. It was a stark contrast to the early days of baking cookies and sharing laughs. Now every smile felt forced, every conversation strained. I confided in Michael about how I felt, but his reactions only added to my distress. He accused me of being ungrateful, of not understanding the sacrifices his parents had made for him. He called me a spoiled brat for complaining about people who had done so much for him. I felt increasingly isolated, not just from his parents, but from Michael as well. The man I moved 5 hours to be with, the man I loved, seemed to be on a completely different page. I began to question everything about our relationship, about the decision to move in with his family, about who I was in this dynamic. I was stuck in a home that no longer felt like home, with people who saw me as an outsider and a partner who didn't seem to see me at all. The feeling of going crazy, of not being able to trust my own feelings, was overwhelming. I was lost, struggling to find my footing in a place where I once thought I'd stand firm. The tension in the house had reached a palpable level, like a thick fog that refused to lift. I knew I couldn't continue living this way, walking on eggshells, feeling unwelcome in my own home. It was time for a direct conversation with Michael, one where I laid out everything that had been weighing on me. I chose a quiet evening when Michael and I were alone in our room to broach the subject. My heart pounded as I started to speak, my words laced with a mix of frustration and desperation. I told him about the growing distance with his parents, the hurtful comments, the incidents that made me feel unsafe, and how his reactions only added to my feelings of isolation. Michael listened, but his expression grew increasingly defensive. When I finished, he let out a long sigh and shook his head. "Anna, you're overthinking things. My parents are good people. They've been through a lot. You just need to try harder to understand them." His words felt like a slap. Try harder? I had been bending over backward to fit into his family, to be helpful, understanding, and patient. But it was never enough. And now, instead of support, I was met with accusations of overreacting. The argument that followed was heated and painful. Michael accused me of being ungrateful, of not appreciating the roof over my head and the efforts his parents had made to welcome me. He said I was acting like a spoiled brat, creating problems where there were none. I tried to explain how his words hurt me, how they made me feel alone and unsupported. But the more I spoke, the more he seemed to withdraw, his words turning colder, more dismissive. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a chasm growing between Michael and me. The man I loved, the man I had moved cities for, was telling me that my feelings, my experiences, were invalid. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, questioning my own perceptions and judgments. The following days were a blur of tension and awkward silences. Michael and I were like strangers, passing each other in the house without a word. His parents seemed oblivious to the storm brewing, or perhaps they chose to ignore it. I began to wonder if I was indeed the problem. Was I being too sensitive? Was I expecting too much? These questions haunted me, eroding my confidence and sense of self. I felt trapped, not just in the house, but in my own mind, doubting everything I thought I knew. But amidst the turmoil, a small voice inside me whispered that this wasn't right. I couldn't be the only one at fault here. The treatment I received, the lack of support from Michael, the feeling of being an outsider in my own home, these were not figments of my imagination. The more I reflected, the clearer it became. I needed to find a way out of this cycle of doubt and unhappiness. I needed to reclaim my sense of self, to find my voice again. But the path to doing so was murky and fraught with uncertainty. I was standing at a crossroads, with each direction leading into the unknown. As winter gave way to the early signs of spring, the internal storm I was weathering showed no signs of subsiding. The house felt colder than ever, a stark contrast to the blooming world outside. Inside, I was battling a turmoil that seemed to grow with each passing day. I spent long hours in our room, alone with my thoughts, reflecting on everything that had happened. My relationship with Michael, once the source of so much joy and hope, now felt like a maze of confusion and pain. I loved him, but that love was entangled in a web of resentment, misunderstanding, and deep emotional disconnect. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had changed since moving in with Michael and his parents. I had always prided myself on being strong, independent, and confident. But now I found myself questioning my every move, doubting my every thought. The vibrant, self-assured woman I once was seemed like a distant memory. I also reflected on the sacrifices I had made. Moving 5 hours away from my family had been a significant step, one I had taken out of love and trust. But now I felt isolated, not just from my family but from the person I used to be. My world had shrunk to the confines of this house, and with it my sense of self. My conversations with Michael had become sparse and functional. The warmth we once shared replaced by a cautious politeness. It was as if we were both treading on thin ice, afraid that any wrong step could shatter the fragile surface under our feet. In moments of solitude, I found myself yearning for the comfort of my family. I missed the easy laughter, the unconditional support, the feeling of being understood and accepted for who I was. I missed being able to share my thoughts without fear of judgment or dismissal. The realization hit me hard. I was losing myself in this relationship, in this house. The Anna that moved in months ago was not the Anna I saw in the mirror now. I had become a shadow, a version of myself that was unfamiliar and unsettling. The question of what to do next weighed heavily on my mind. Leaving seemed like the obvious solution, but it wasn't that simple. There were financial considerations, the fear of being alone, and the daunting prospect of starting over. But staying meant continuing to live in an environment that was slowly eroding my sense of self-worth and happiness. I sought counsel from friends and even considered therapy. Each conversation brought new perspectives, but the decision ultimately was mine to make. It was clear that something had to change. I couldn't continue living in a state of perpetual unhappiness and self-doubt. As spring turned into summer, the decision crystallized in my mind. I needed to find my independence again, to reclaim the life I had before, a life where I felt strong, valued, and happy. The journey ahead would be challenging, but the first step, as always, is the hardest. As the summer sun brought warmth and light, I knew it was time to make some decisions. The resolve to change my situation had been growing, and now it was time to act. I started by seeking advice and support outside the walls of the house that had become my prison. Talking to friends was a balm for my weary soul. They listened, offered empathy, and reminded me of the person I used to be. Their words were like a mirror, reflecting a version of myself I had almost forgotten. It was during these conversations that I realized the importance of having a support system, people who saw me for who I truly was. I also sought professional help. The therapist I met with provided a safe space to unravel my thoughts and feelings. It was through these sessions that I began to understand the depth of the impact my living situation had on me. I was not crazy or overly sensitive. I was reacting to a genuinely challenging environment. Armed with this newfound clarity, I started exploring my options. I began saving money, cutting down on unnecessary expenses, and looking for affordable places I could move into. The idea of living on my own was daunting, but it also filled me with a sense of excitement and freedom. It was a tangible goal, a light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. The most challenging part was confronting Michael about our relationship. I chose a quiet evening when we were both calm and rested to have the conversation. I explained my feelings, my need for independence, and how our current living situation was affecting me. I told him that I was considering moving out, not to end our relationship, but to save it. Michael's reaction was mixed. He seemed to understand on some level why I felt the way I did. But there was also a sense of hurt, a feeling of being abandoned. We talked for hours, navigating our way through a maze of emotions and fears. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in months. Despite the pain and the uncertainty, there was a sense of relief in having everything out in the open. We agreed to give each other some space to think about what we both wanted from the relationship and our lives. The weeks that followed were a time of introspection and planning. I continued to save money, research apartments, and mentally prepare myself for the possibility of a new beginning. The decision to move out was not an easy one, but it felt right. It was a step towards reclaiming my independence, my sense of self. Through it all, I held on to the hope that Michael and I could find a way to navigate this new phase of our relationship. But I also knew that no matter what happened between us, I needed to be true to myself, to live a life where I felt respected, valued, and happy. The decision to move out was like turning the page to a new chapter in my life. It was a step filled with uncertainty, but also with a sense of empowerment. I had finally taken control of my situation, making a choice that prioritized my well-being. As I started packing my things, I felt a mix of emotions. There was sadness in leaving a place I had once hoped would be a long-term home, and in the strain it had placed on my relationship with Michael. But there was also a growing sense of excitement and liberation. I was about to embark on a journey of self-discovery, to rebuild the life I wanted on my own terms. The day I moved out, Michael helped me with my bags. Our goodbye was bittersweet. We promised to keep in touch, to try and work on our relationship from a new perspective. but there was also an unspoken understanding that things might never be the same again. That was a reality we both had to accept. Moving into my new apartment, a small but cozy space, was a breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The walls of my new home were blank canvases, waiting for me to fill them with my own story, my own identity. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. I reconnected with hobbies and interests I had neglected, spent more time with friends and family, and continued my therapy sessions. Each day was a step towards healing, towards rebuilding the confidence and self-assuredness I had lost. My relationship with Michael evolved in unexpected ways. With the distance between us, we began to see each other and our relationship more clearly. We had deep, meaningful conversations about our needs and expectations. Sometimes they were difficult and emotional, but they were always honest. In this newfound space, I rediscovered parts of myself that I had lost. I rekindled my love for painting, a passion I had set aside in the chaos of the past months. I started a small freelance project, combining my artistic skills with a newfound sense of entrepreneurial spirit. It was a small step, but it filled me with a sense of purpose and joy. As summer turned to autumn, I looked back at the journey I had been on. It was a path marked by challenges, self-doubt, and pain, but also by growth, resilience, and self-discovery. I had learned the hard way that sometimes, to find your place in the world, you have to be willing to leave the comfort of what you know. My story with Michael was still being written. Whether we would find our way back to each other or forge separate paths, only time would tell. But one thing was clear: I was no longer the person who had moved into his parents' house all those months ago. I was stronger, wiser, and more in tune with who I was and what I wanted from life. And for the first time in a long time, I was genuinely excited about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead. I had found my path forward, and I was ready to see where it would lead.